Beneath the waves of forgotten oceans, beneath deserts that whisper through shifting sands, and hidden deep within the echoes of ancient legends, traces remain of those who walked this world long before us. Scattered ruins lie across every continent, too old, too precise, and too mysterious to fit neatly into our history books. No names, no dates, just silence and questions. From the lost halls of Atlantis to the hollow earth myths of Agartha, this isn't just a dive into ancient ruins. It's a journey through the forbidden chapters of our past, buried by floods, fire, and time itself. So before we step deeper into the shadowed maze of forgotten worlds, make sure you're subscribed. This path winds into the unknown, and you won't want to miss what we uncover. Because if these lost civilizations teach us anything, it's this: timing is everything. Stay curious, and may luck be on your side. Atlantis. The name crashes like a wave through time, older than cities, older than sacred texts. It echoes across marble tablets, inked scrolls, and the fleeting glow of modern screens. Once Atlantis was no jest or tourist lure. It was terror, awe, a truth so ancient it blurred in the retelling. Plato ignited the spark in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, rarely read unless you're chasing legends. He spoke of a vast island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a realm richer than any dream, ruled by divine kings, commanding a fleet so mighty it could eclipse the sea. Their temples gleamed with orichalcum. Their meadows thrived on engineered waters, and their tools, if you peer closely, hint at a science we'd call fiction. In one cataclysmic day and night, earthquakes roared, floods surged, and Atlantis sank, devoured by the sea, as if Poseidon himself hushed it to sleep. Plato insisted this was no fable. He traced the tale to Solon, Athens' revered lawgiver, who heard it from Egyptian priests guarding scrolls older than Greece itself. They spoke of a war between Athens and Atlantis, 9,000 years before Solon's era, 12,000 years from our time, when the younger Dryas ended, ice melted, and seas rose in a global upheaval. Pause here, not for drama though it hums in the air, but to ponder. Is it stranger to think Plato lied, or that he unveiled a buried truth? For 2,300 years we've scoffed, deeming the tale too grand to trust. Yet Atlantis lingers at a crossroads of uneasy facts. Tug the thread and myths unravel into evidence. Sudden sea level spikes submerged ruins off Cuba's coast, and the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania, a vast circular scar in the desert, eerily matching Plato's vision of Atlantis's concentric rings. Once fertile, fed by rivers, this land holds elephant bones, those sacred beasts of the lost island. Coincidence, or a whisper from memory? The tale of a drowned kingdom isn't Atlantis's alone. Every culture cradles a flood myth, a sunken city, a people erased. From Sumer's Eridu to India's Dwarka, from Celtic Wise to Doggerland. Lost beneath the North Sea, the oceans are crypts. We, earthbound and fleeting, are the forgetful heirs of those who survived. But the true jolt lies in the technology Plato describes, too advanced, too modern, as if Atlantis wielded secrets we're only now rediscovering. Beneath the Earth's ancient skin irrigation, networks hum with a precision that whispers of modern minds, their channels carved as if by a master's hand. Buildings gleam with metals smooth as glass, catching the sun like a forgotten promise. A navy vast as a storm cloud stretches across seas, its might rivaling empires born centuries later. Such marvels, blooming in 9,600 before Common Era, defy reason, unless our history isn't a straight path, but a wheel, turning through cycles of rise and ruin. If so, Atlantis isn't a fairy tale. It's a shadow cast forward, a warning etched in stone, drowned in water and scorched by fire. Mystics, dreamers, and scholars deep in their cups have all staked claims, but Atlantis answers to none. It belongs to the abyss, to the silent dark, where waves cradle secrets, to the pulse of a world that lived, died, and perhaps lingers, waiting to be stirred. We mock it not for its absurdity, but for its weight, a truth too heavy to bear. We stand on the bones of titans, crowning ourselves the summit of time. Yet Atlantis gnaws at our certainty, a ghost woven into the world's dreaming mind, buried beneath our towers and orbiting machines. Atlantis didn't merely vanish. It seeped into our stories, its essence scattering like seeds on fertile ground. It's the archetype, the spark that ignites every tale of lost glory, the root of our obsession with forgotten realms. Perhaps that's no accident. Perhaps Atlantis was real, and not alone. Consider orichalcum, that fire-bright metal Plato spoke of second only to gold, as familiar to him as sunlight. Yet it's absent from our vaults, unknown to our shovels. Or is it? In 2015, divers pulled ingots from a shipwreck off Sicily 26 centuries old, their blend of copper, zinc, and whispers of other elements echoing ancient whispers, a relic of lost craft, or a fleeting glimpse of truth. Then there's the stone itself, megaliths submerged, where seas once stood lower, defying time's rules. The Bimini Road in the Bahamas, its rectangular blocks aligned too neatly for nature's whims, shrugs off skeptics who cry coincidence. Off Japan's Yonaguni Island, terraces and pillars rise, their edges sharp as a sculptor's blade too precise for chaos. Critics see tricks of the mind. Believers see footprints of engineers who walked before us. And maps? Oh, the maps. The Piri Reis chart of 1513, drawn from older shadows, unveils Antarctica's ice-free form, a secret only satellites should know. Who traced those shores when the world was untamed civilization as we frame? It shouldn't reach so far back, farming at 10,000 before Common Era, writing by 3,200 cities soon after. Yet Atlantis laughs at our timelines, conjuring a society of politics, artistry, metallurgy, and sea-spanning war 12,000 years ago. Call it anachronistic prowess, a brilliance out of place, and Atlantis wears it like a crown. Imagine Plato's tale as no myth, but a memory, carried by those who fled the waves, whispered through priestly lines ancient even to the Egyptians, who shared it with Solon, a truth that time couldn't quite erase. What if Atlantis is no mere city, but the fossilized heartbeat of humanity's first dance, with greatness, a lost world, not just a lost place? The question that follows stings. What snuffed it out? Plato points to divine wrath, a civilization grown too proud, too indulgent, and swept away in a celestial reckoning. The tale feels ancient, yet eerily familiar, a shadow of our own ambitions. It's the oldest rhythm in our souls. We build a guardian of time's secrets. We break, and we begin again. Even science, we know that steadfast, now unveils a cloak of shadows. The suggestion, though debated, ignites a spark that a comet crashed into Earth 12,000 years ago, unleashing chaos, floods, tempests, wildfires, and the ruin of worlds in a fleeting, shattering instant. Could this be Atlantis's executioner? More than a story, Atlantis becomes a mirror reflecting our fragile present, a voice from the deep murmuring that we too have raised towers, sailed seas, and deemed ourselves invincible, only to face sea's unyielding claim. Atlantis didn't fade into quiet oblivion. It lingers, its echo woven into tongues, legends, and ruins that defy explanation. It haunts strange maps and the uneasy shiver we feel gazing at the ocean, wondering what secrets sleep below. The true terror isn't that Atlantis might be real. It's that it might be ordinary. One verse in a song of fallen empires. If Atlantis was but a single chapter, the next page turns stranger still far to the east, where waters cradle forgotten lands, and myths don't merely endure, they multiply. Lemuria, or Mu, by any name, is a phantom that shouldn't exist, yet it dances on the edge of memory. Its tale began with a solemn scholar, Philip Sclater, a zoologist in 1864, peering at maps with a furrowed brow. Lemurs thrived in Madagascar. Their fossils dotted India, but the vast Indian Ocean between held nothing. No trace, no bridge. Undaunted, Sclater conjured a sunken continent, a vast cradle stretching from Madagascar to India, where these tree-dwelling creatures once roamed. He christened it Lemuria, a nod to the Lemurus, a hypothesis born of Victorian confidence. For a fleeting moment, it stood as science's darling, until Darwin's theories, plate tectonics, and continental drift cast it into the shadows, relegated to the dustbin of quaint ideas, alongside phlogiston and humoral medicine. Lemuria should have withered, a forgotten footnote in geology's awkward youth. But it didn't. Like a seed caught in the wind, it transformed, sprouting into something wilder, untamed. By the early 20th century, Lemuria had shed its scientific skin, reborn in the hands of mystics like Helena Blavatsky, who wove it into a tapestry of spiritual grandeur, a lost world pulsing with secrets no map could hold. Lemuria, they proclaimed, was no mere stepping stone of land. It was a cradle of civilization, ancient beyond Atlantis' home, to towering beings who spoke with thoughts, not tongues, their wisdom shimmering like starlight. Here humanity was not yet bound by flesh, but danced as mist, half spirit, half dream, the first sparks of existence. They say Lemuria sprawled from Madagascar's shores to the lonely sentinels of Easter Island, rising and crumbling before the first chisel struck stone, birthing not just culture but the very pulse of consciousness. Wild, perhaps, yet no one has silenced its echo. Within this tapestry of myth, threads of truth tug at history's edges, forgotten ruins on nameless isles, Polynesian tales carried on ocean winds, and the moai of Easter Island, their blank gazes fixed on a horizon older than time, whispering of something Lemurian. The Pacific, a vast and restless giant, guards its secrets well. Its depth, 90%, unmapped stretch across millions of square miles, a watery vault where lost continents might slumber. Consider Zealandia, a submerged landmass, as vast as India, lurking beneath New Zealand's waves. Geologists only in the early 2000s acknowledged its truth: 80% drowned, once dry, once alive. If Zealandia, why not Mumu, Lemuria's Pacific twin, emerged from the fevered mind of Augustus Laplangin, a 19th century dreamer who claimed ancient Mayan texts sang of a vanished motherland. Mu, he declared, was the womb of all civilizations, with Atlantis a mere outpost, Egypt and Sumer but faint reflections of its radiance. Scholars scoffed, their eyes rolling like storm-tossed seas, but the faithful clung tight. James Churchward, a mystic cloaked in soldier's garb, swore he deciphered stone tablets in India, unveiling Mu as a paradise of crystal machines and souls aglow with enlightenment, flourishing 10,000 years before our first altars rose, only to perish in fire and flood. The tale rings familiar, a refrain in every pre-flood myth, a memory humanity can't shake, etched into the marrow of our stories. Science may dismiss Mu, but the earth plays by its own rules. Nan Madol off Pohnpei in Micronesia rises from the sea, 92 artificial islands, their basalt pillars heavy as 50 tons, stacked without quarries, tools, or cranes. Local whispers speak of magic of giants. Could this be Lemuria's shadow, Mu's last breath? These names, Lemuria, Mu, refuse to fade, resurfacing in the gaps of our knowing and ruins. We can't age scripts, we can't read, and bloodlines that defy neat categories. They murmur in flood tales, in memories of swallowed islands, of skyships, firestones, and golden cities that soared and sank before the stars were named. Easter Island, adrift in the Pacific's heart, thousands of miles from any shore, cradles its stone giants carved by a people whose roots elude us. Polynesians, yes, but their songs tell of long-year voyagers from a sunken west, a homeland lost to waves. The Rongorongo tongue found only there remains a locked riddle, Declan's silent symbols hinting at a lineage deeper than we dare trace. Close your eyes and picture a world before memory itself, a planet scarred by creeping disasters, rising tides and skies torn by comets or quaking earth. Civilizations scaled heights only to shatter. Survivors fled their truths, softening into chants, then silence. Yet echoes endure, pyramids not just in Egypt or Mexico, but in China, Bosnia, and beneath Japan's seas, their forms too alike for chance, their craft too refined for mere tribes. Perhaps they didn't mimic one another. Perhaps they remembered. Lemuria may lack lemurs, Mu may lack maps, but together they weave a constellation of doubt, a murmur in the fractures of time, daring us to listen. The ocean, a vast and silent keeper of truths, guards its mysteries with an unyielding grip. It's not a question of whether these lost worlds existed, but how much of their saga we dare to uncover. If Lemuria and Mu were real, if a sprawling web of civilization once wove across the Indian and Pacific seas, then our map of the ancient past crumbles. The timeline fractures, the story we tell ourselves unravels. Their end was no quiet. Fade legends speak of skies, a blaze of wars with Atlantis, of gods turning their backs of temples, devoured by towering waves, the earth itself rising in fury. Their fall was a scream, not a whisper, leaving ripples and ruins. We can't decipher myths, we shrug off, and names we murmur even in disbelief. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, the first empire, the second, and a bridge between spanning not just oceans, but the ages. Now, we venture eastward into the frost, and the impossible to a realm beyond the north wind's howl. A land where the sun never bows, where time forgets to age, where death loses its claim. They called it Hyperborea, a name that hums with promise and peril. If your mind reels, hit that subscribe button. This journey circles the globe, and we need your voice in the chorus. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? And what hour holds you now? Let's chart this enigma, one time zone at a time. Hyperborea wasn't merely a place. It was a whisper, a dream, a compass needle bent, not north, but upward toward the unattainable. Tucked beyond the known world, it shimmered like a mirage, felt more than seen in eternal summer cloaked in the earth's iciest heart. In Greek lore, Hyperborea lay past Boreas, the north wind's god, hence its name beyond the north. But what waited beyond the north in those ancient days? Nothing but madness. Death maps trailing off into serpents and warnings. Yet there, Hyperborea bloomed a paradise, perched between heaven and frostbite. Its people, ageless and untouched by death, spoke a tongue alien to Greek ears yet clear to every soul. They honored Apollo, god of light and clarity, who legends say wintered among them, his golden swan chariot, gliding through skies forever bright. This was Eden without borders, a realm free of strife, war, or cynicism, filled with music, sunlight, and a claim to the Arctic's wildest shores. Born in poetry, Hyperborea refused to stay caged in verse. Pythagoras of Triangle fame swore his wisdom flowed from its springs. Ancient mystics and philosophers hinted at its truth, the name resurfacing like a star that never sets. Scholars today dismiss it a fantasy, a metaphor, a fevered dream of sun-starved Greeks. But the tale persists, echoed across cultures. The Celts sang of a northern isle where the dead found peace. The Norse spoke of Thule, where the sun grazed the horizon but never sank. India's Vedas dreamed of Uttarakuru, a northern haven of endless light. The Chinese whispered of Shambhala's northern kin just beyond the soul's reach. Even the Inuit dwellers of the Arctic's edge tell of a warm land at the pole ringed by peaks home to spirits, or a vanished people lost to ice. A shared madness, or a memory worn smooth by time geology, stirs the pot further. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, tales of open polar seas, fossilized plants, and warm-blooded creatures far too north sparked theories of a temperate Arctic. Modern science confirms the region wasn't always a frozen waste. During the Pliocene epoch, 3 to 5 million years ago, lush forests and rivers thrived there, a cradle of life where ice now reigns. Hyperborea, a dream or a distant echo of a world we've forgotten. 12,000 years ago, the world shuddered, a pivot point where the last ice age waned, the younger Dryas unleashed its fury, and the earth rewrote its own story. Glaciers wept into rising seas, storms raged, and climates turned traitor. Could a civilization have thrived in that chaos, in an Arctic not yet chained by ice, when Earth's tilt cradled warmth at the poles? Hyperborea, a pre-flood beacon, might have stood where no one now dares dream. The idea isn't as wild as it seems. Enter crustal displacement, a theory woven by Charles Hapgood and blessed by Einstein's nod. Not the slow creep of tectonic plates, but a cataclysmic lurch, Earth's outer shell sliding in one brutal sweep, triggered by a wobble in its spin. In a night, tropics could freeze, fertile plains could drown in frost. A northern paradise, blooming in temperate glory, might awaken entombed in glaciers. Hyperborea, no longer myth, becomes a casualty of a planet's tantrum. Ancient maps stir the mystery deeper. The 1537 Orance Fine Map paints Antarctica not as an icy tomb, but a land of rivers and ice-free shores. It sketches islands and waterways at the North Pole, hinting at life where only cold should reign. How did they know who whispered these truths? We assume ancient peoples stayed close to home. But what if the world's heart beat at the pole? In mystic lore, Hyperborea transcends place. It's the cradle, the fount of wisdom, the axis where light and life began. Twisted in the 20th century into dangerous myths, its core persists a belief that the North was once a genesis, a still point in a turning world. Perhaps we seek Hyperborea with the wrong tools. It's not on maps, but in our veins, genetic whispers of migrations from nowhere, DNA markers defying the out-of-Africa tale, echoes of a people who fled not to the north, but from it. Megaliths, too point to secrets. Their alignments, solstices, stars. Cardinal lines often gaze toward an ancient pole, a sky no longer ours, as if their builders worshipped a sun that danced differently. Hyperborea wasn't just a land. It was the first spark, a cultural supernova, so ancient it became legend before the floods came. Too advanced for monuments, its truth traveled in tales too remote to survive, when the earth shifted, vanishing beneath a shroud of ice. Yet it didn't perish. It sang to the Greeks, the Norse, the Celts, the Hindus, and Siberian shamans, a shared vision of a northern Eden, where war never scarred, where time held no sway, a memory of humanity's first peace. If Hyperborea was real, what else slumbers in our forgotten depths? Myths aren't falsehoods. They're shards, glimmers of truths, too vast to hold whole. Hyperborea may be lost, but another world endured, not above or beneath waves, but within the earth itself. Agartha, no mere city, is a reversal, a civilization folded inward, a mirror to our world, older, deeper, stranger. While others sank or froze, Agartha slipped below into the earth's secret heart. Born from a tangle of occult tales, Tibetan whispers, and fevered folklore, Agartha is no cave or hideout, but a subterranean empire lit by an inner sun, home to beings who guard ancient wisdom. Outlandish, perhaps, yet the notion of a world beneath our feet is no stranger. It pulses in stories across time, a realm where the earth itself cradles secrets we're only beginning to chase. It didn't start with Jules Verne or fringe YouTubers. The Greeks spoke of Hades. The Norse described Svartalfheim, the realm of subterranean beings. Hindu cosmology is stacked with layers of Patala Loka, subterranean realms of immense beauty and advanced technology. The Buddhists whisper of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightened beings, sometimes described as being accessible only through secret tunnels under the Himalayas. And then there's Agartha, beating heart beneath them all. The name itself emerged from theosophical texts in the 19th century, particularly those spun by Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre. He didn't just speculate, he described detailed, mapped. Agartha, he said, was ruled by a sovereign known as the King of the World. Its society was hierarchical, but benevolent, spiritually evolved, technologically advanced. Agartha was what humanity could have been if we hadn't gotten distracted by power war and breakfast cereal. Saint-Yves claimed Agartha wasn't just real. It was aware, watching, waiting, sending occasional emissaries to the surface when we screwed up too badly. Kind of like divine tech support. Lunacy, probably. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Too many breadcrumbs lead in the same direction. In 1926, renowned Russian mystic and painter Nicholas Roerich embarked on an expedition through Central Asia. He claimed to have encountered monks who confirmed the existence of Agartha, describing it as an underground realm connected by tunnels spanning continents from Mongolia to the Amazon to Antarctica. He didn't say it existed. He asked why we had forgotten. And Roerich wasn't alone. Ferdynand Ossendowski, a Polish explorer, wrote a book in 1922 titled Beasts, Men, and Gods. In it, he recounts tales told to him by Mongolian lamas of a subterranean kingdom called Agartha, where the king of the world rules over a vast population of enlightened beings. They told him Agarthans possessed powerful technologies, including machines that could see events happening on the other side of the planet. One monk with a face like a stone carving said, "When the barbarians come again, the king will surface. He will not come in peace." Chilling, but it gets better or worse, depending on your worldview. Enter the Nazis. In one of the more deranged chapters of real history, Nazi occultists, particularly those within the Ahnenerbe, a research institute founded by Heinrich Himmler, became obsessed with Agartha. They believed in a hollow earth, believed there were openings at the poles. Some claimed that Agathans were the ancestors of the Aryan race and that ancient wisdom had been hidden their wisdom that could restore the Reich. One 1938 expedition to Tibet sought the entrance to Agartha. They didn't find it or didn't come back. Either way, what they did find were temples with intricate mandalas, resembling maps of a world within a world, concentric rings, mountain suns, a geography that didn't match Earth's surface but matched something. And then there's the science, or at least the stuff masquerading as it. Hollow Earth theory has been debunked by mainstream geology. The pressure and heat at Earth's core are simply too great. But what hasn't been explained are the persistent anomalies, strange magnetic fluctuations at the poles. Unexplained, subterranean echoes, deep borehole experiments, like the Kola super deep borehole that encountered baffling heat spikes, and inexplicable sounds far below the surface. Even modern seismology, our clearest window into the Earth's interior, admits uncertainty. We know what should be there. Liquid outer core, solid inner core, but we've never seen it, never touched it. And the Earth's crust, where all of human history lives, is less than 1% of the planet's volume. That's a lot of space to hide a lot of history. Let's talk tunnels. All over the world, ancient tunnels stretch for miles, dug through rock, with techniques we can't fully explain. In Europe, there are Neolithic tunnel networks running for hundreds of miles beneath the soil. No lighting, no soot, just clean-cut passageways leading where, in South America, the Inca spoke of chincanas, underground roads leading to lost cities. Jesuit missionaries feared them. Modern explorers have vanished in them. And in the Himalayas, Tibetan monks still speak of Shangri-La, a paradise not above the clouds, but below the peaks, accessible only by invitation, guarded by silence. Could these be outposts, entrance ramps to the Agrathan interstate? Even weirder, some claim Agartha wasn't always underground, that it used to be surface level, that it was pushed beneath the earth during a cataclysm, maybe a war, maybe a pole shift, maybe something worse. A civilization that escaped downward. It didn't flee outward, but inward, buried not by chance, but by choice. What does that mean? Our tales of giants, gods, and sky beings might not have descended from the heavens, but risen from the depths. Some UFO sightings, craft emerging from lakes or vanishing into mountains, align eerily with the idea of Agarthan vessels, not flying saucers, but subterranean machines wielding physics. We've either lost or never grasped. And here's the twist: Agartha may not stand alone. The theory digs deeper, proposing a network Agartha, yes, but also Shambhala Telos Urks, a lattice of ancient havens, where knowledge endured after surface worlds crumbled, where memory didn't perish, it hid. Now, as ice caps melt, earthquakes shift the Earth's bones, and sonar probes, the unthinkable Agartha stirs not in flesh, but in thought. The collective unconscious cracks, and through those fissures, whispers seep. What if the true secret is this? We aren't the first to tread this earth, not the first builders, not the first dreamers. Agartha isn't just a lost city. It's a time capsule, a sealed vault of pre-flood wisdom, ethics, and memory locked beneath. The surface was never safe. The surface never endures. Agartha does. If Agartha is the hidden root, what's the blossom? Its twin, its reflection. A land not entombed, but veiled. Not below, but above, yet untouchable. A kingdom cradled in clouds, shielded by snow and silence. It's time to climb, to seek the path to Shambhala, high above the choked valleys and frail rooftops of human tales. In the Himalayas' jagged arms, a legend older than the peaks endures. A place so pure, so still, that time itself forgets to move. Its name, Shambhala, carries the taste of wind, the scent of cold incense, the echo of something lost. In Sanskrit, it means place of peace or place of silence. But no silence roars louder. At first, Shambhala seems a spiritual mirage, another dream born of humanity's endless hunger for paradise. But peer closer, strip away the chants and smoke, and a chilling truth emerges: a civilization that defies death, a realm of knowledge hidden not for weakness, but for its power. Shambhala's roots sink deep into Tibetan Buddhism's Kalachakra Tantra, a text blending astrophysics, metaphysics, and warlike prophecy. It tells of a hidden kingdom in Central Asia, ringed by snow-crowned peaks, open only to those pure of heart, tuned to the right vibration like a karmic compass. Shambhala isn't just serene. It's a city of glass and emeralds ruled by sage, king's warriors who wield science. Its capital, Kalapa, is vivid symmetrical structures, a towering palace and spires pulsing with energy drawn not from fire or oil, but from something ancient harnessed, not consumed. The current king, Rudra Chakran, sits enthroned, sipping enlightenment. He waits, watches, prepares. Shambhala isn't merely a refuge. It's a clock, a doomsday engine, wounded by prophecy. When chaos reigns, when barbarism triumphs, when corruption festers and machines enslave, Shambhala's gates will swing wide. Rudra Chakran will march with his army, not symbolic but real enlightened warriors, on glowing robotic steeds wielding weapons of wisdom and fury. They won't parley or preach. They'll reset the world. It sounds wild, almost absurd, until you count the seekers. In 1924, Nicholas Roerich, Russian mystic and painter, trekked across India, Tibet, and Mongolia hunting Shambhala, backed by secret societies and spy networks. He claimed telepathic guidance, saw UFOs, and heard monks swear the kingdom was real, just out of phase, a parallel reality, a frequency just beyond reach. You don't find Shambhala, you tune to it. He wasn't alone. The Nazis, ever drawn to the occult, sent their Ahnenerbe to chase Shambhala and Agartha, seeking Aryan roots and ancient might. They returned empty-handed, eyes haunted. Tibetan texts insist Shambhala yields only to the destined, not the forceful. Its boundaries are guarded not by armies, but by truth itself. If your soul is tainted, the gate stays invisible. Perhaps we call it myth, because a place that chooses its guests is easier to dismiss than one that judges us. But Shambhala grows stranger. The Kalachakra texts frame it cosmologically nested within our world, like a shadow dimension, a fourth-dimensional fortress just out of sync. Shambhala has watched every empire rise and fall, older than Babylon, Atlantis, the flood. It didn't sink or freeze, it hid. Atlantis drowned Lemuria, sank Hyperborea, froze. Agartha burrowed, but Shambhala waited. Where is it? The Himalayas, vast and unyielding, are attempting answer their valleys and caves uncharted. Some say Shambhala moves a city unbound, glimpsed only in cosmic alignments or sacred chants at high altitudes. It flickers like a beacon, revealing itself to the worthy, the mad, the desperate. Modern tales whisper of lost travelers, in the mountains pilgrims, returning changed eyes. Two calm hands that heal minds that know too much. They speak little but smile as if they've seen beyond words. And the tunnels. Always the tunnels link Shambhala to Agartha's network. A spiritual capital tied by unseen highways beneath the earth. Powered by ley lines, magnetic pulses, and cosmic knots, call it celestial Wi-Fi. Is Shambhala real? A psychic echo, an interdimensional vault, perhaps all at once. Its existence proves one stark truth: we were never alone. Something human, older, wiser, weary, has watched from the shadows. As floods creep, fires rise, and truth becomes scarce, the prophecy's pulse quickens. Shambhala's gates creak, its army stirs. Rudra Chakran hones his blade not for cruelty but necessity. When they open, it won't be a lecture, but a reckoning. Before the clouds part and hooves thunder, let's turn back to a civilization, not cloaked in mysticism but carved in ancient texts, a realm of sky wars, mathematical tongues, and cities of flying machines. The Rama Empire, before Greece dreamed of democracy, before Babylon's towers rose, before Egypt etched gods in stone, a civilization spoke in thunder and soared in flame. The Rama Empire, absent from textbooks, lingers as a faint echo in myth, brushed off with a scholar's shrug. Open the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. These aren't bedtime stories, but battle logs, blueprints, ancient science fiction stripped of pretense. This was no land of simple cloth and crude worship, but a world of flying craft, beam weapons, nuclear fire. The Mahabharata, with over 200,000 verses, is a sprawling epic, terrifying in scope. In the Bhagavad Gita alone, a god unveils the universe's machinery, urging a prince to slaughter, because cosmically it's trivial. Elsewhere, in the Vanaparva, celestial chariots dart across skies and seas in an instant. Weapons blind burn and consume flesh-hair-falling bodies, igniting. The Brahmastra, a missile blazing with the fury of 1,000 suns, scorches earth, poisons rivers, and drives survivors mad. J. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, quoted the Gita after the first nuclear test. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He wasn't waxing poetic. He meant it later, hinting that 1945's blast wasn't history's first, only the first in modern history. In the Drona Parva, the warrior Aswatthama unleashes a weapon that kills unborn children, sterilizes land, slays beasts, and stops rain. Skin peels, shockwaves, ripple mushroom clouds rise, described in Sanskrit 3,000 years ago. Then there are the Vimanas, no mere myth, despite television's alien-fueled hype. Vedic texts and the Mahabharata detail metal flying machines powered by mercury or arcane engines with vertical takeoff disc or pyramid shapes, some diving beneath waves. They boasted stealth mirrors, armor-slicing beams, and gravity-defying propulsion. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a 10th century Sanskrit engineering text, devotes a chapter to Vimana's construction controls and flight protocols, not poetry, but schematics. If these were just tales, we'd dismiss them, but the earth speaks louder. Mohenjo-Daro in modern Pakistan, an Indus Valley marvel of the 3rd millennium before Common Era had running water, planned streets, and radiation. In the 1920s, archaeologists found skeletons strewn in Mohenjo-Daro streets, unburied, frozen mid-step, some hand-in-hand, one fused to stone. Radiation levels were 50 times normal bricks, vitrified by unearthly heat. No volcanoes, no fires, just heat. In Jodhpur, Rajasthan's desert, a 3-square-mile layer of radioactive ash defies explanation. No reactors, no mines, just scars where the Mahabharata places a final clash. The Rama Empire wasn't a city or kingdom, but a vast network, a pan-Asian alliance of advanced societies across India, Pakistan, Nepal, Tibet, perhaps Southeast Asia, even China, bound by trade war, faith, and science. Ruled not by kings, but rishi sages, bending reality through spirit. And tech, enlightenment, wasn't a dream, but a mandate for leadership. Science and soul were one. They faced foes, asuras, nagas, rakshasas, demons, to some but perhaps rival humans, a faction prizing power over wisdom. Some scholars argue the Rama-Asura wars were real, not myth, a clash of technologies. A battle that left the earth trembling. It was intercontinental, interdimensional, and intertemporal. A war that ended not with surrender, but mutual destruction. And yet remnants remain. Temples aligned with constellations that only made sense 10,000 years ago. Massive stone. Lingams with unexplained magnetic properties. Blueprints for flying machines hidden in coded Sanskrit. Vibrations and mantras that match electromagnetic frequencies, and a lingering feeling, especially in the Himalayan foothills, that something remembers. This isn't nostalgia, it's trauma. Because what if the Rama Empire didn't end? What if it went silent? Some claim its last survivors retreated underground into the same tunnel systems that feed into Agartha. Others believe they phased out of our reality, entirely entering a higher dimension, where they wait, watching, guiding. And some think the Rama Empire was never truly gone, that its echoes can be felt in every burst of genius, every leap of technology, every civilization that suddenly bloomed without warning. What if we're not inventing? What if we're remembering? Because the story of Rama is the story of every rise and fall of brilliance, poisoned by pride of civilizations that grew so powerful, they forgot the earth could bleed. And when it did, they vanished. Not into the sea, not into myth, into memory. And if that's true, if the Rama Empire was real and its wars were nuclear and its knowledge encoded in mantra and stone, then our modern world is not a miracle. It's a reboot. But just as we begin to grasp that, to accept that ancient India may have reached heights, we still dream of another mystery, yanks us deeper. One older than dynasties. One buried beneath the pyramids. A civilization that never had a name, only a face, a god, Osiris. Osirian civilization. Egypt. Before there were pharaohs. Before pyramids kissed the clouds, before the Nile had a name, there was something else. Not Egypt. Not yet. Something older. The Osirian civilization. It is the ghost kingdom beneath the golden mask of Egypt. The bones beneath the sarcophagus. A civilization remembered not in annals but in allegories. One that never signed its name to stone but left fingerprints. Anyone temples, misaligned technologies misunderstood, and gods that seem too real. Start with Osiris. In most tellings, he's a deity, a fertility god, lord of the dead, the one who taught man, agriculture, and laws. But scrape off the symbolism, and something else glimmers underneath, something human. According to the ancient Egyptian priest Manetho, writing during the 3rd century before Common Era, there were dynasties that ruled before the dynasties, gods, demigods, and spirits of the dead who reigned for tens of thousands of years. Osiris was one of them. A king, a bringer of light, not a mythic figure in a parable, but a ruler, flesh and blood. And when you follow Osiris through the labyrinth of Egyptian myth, you realize he didn't rule in a fantasy. He ruled in Zep-Tepi. The first time Egyptian cosmology refers to Zep-Tepi as a golden age when the gods walked among men, when civilization appeared fully formed, not through evolution, but revelation overnight, as if someone turned on a light switch. Language, architecture, astronomy, mathematics all at once. Boom. Zep-Tepi was not the dawn. It was the memory of a rebirth. And the place most tied to that memory, Abydos. Abydos is one of the oldest sites in Egypt, an ancient necropolis, a city of the dead. But before it housed graves, it housed something else. The Temple of Seti, carved into its walls, high above the heads of tourists and skeptics, is the so-called Abydos helicopter. You've seen the pictures. A relief panel depicting what looks like a modern helicopter, a submarine and a plane, all crammed together in a tight formation, like some sort of 3,000-year-old aviation meme. Mainstream Egyptologists say it's a palimpsest, overlapping hieroglyphs eroded into suggestive shapes. But maybe it's not erosion. Maybe it's remembrance. Maybe the priests of Abydos weren't drawing what they saw. They were drawing what they remembered. Now go west to Dendera. There, in the Hathor Temple, you'll find the so-called Dendera light. It's a carved scene depicting a lotus flower from which a serpent emerges enclosed in what looks remarkably like a glass bulb. Inside the bulb, a wire, a filament, a power source held by what looks like an insulator. Next to it, a priest operates what appears to be a control device. To the untrained eye, it looks like Egyptian art. To the suspicious mind, it looks like a light bulb. And don't stop there. Let's get to the big boys, the pyramids. We are told they were tombs. That 3 pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, commissioned them during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 before Common Era. We're told they were built with copper tools and manpower. We're told this with a straight face. But we've never found a mummy in a pyramid. Not one. What we have found are anomalies. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned almost perfectly to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. Its dimensions encode the golden ratio pi and the speed of light if you use meters, which the Egyptians weren't supposed to have. It stands at a height of 146.6 meters, which corresponds to 1/1000th the distance from Earth to the Sun. Coincidence? Maybe one, but all of them. The interior shafts align with Orion's belt and Sirius, the same stars associated with Osiris and Isis. The entire Giza Plateau is a stone map of the sky in 10,500 before Common Era. Wait, what? Yes, that date again. 10,500 before Common Era. The same rough window as the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. The same rough window as Plato's Atlantis. The same window that just keeps popping up in myths disguised as history. What if the pyramids weren't built in 2500 before Common Era but restored? What if the dynastic Egyptians didn't construct them from scratch, but inherited them, maintained them, rebranded them? That's Osirian theory, that a pre-dynastic civilization, call it Osirian or Zep-Tepian or just lost Egypt, built the megalithic core of ancient Egypt using knowledge we still can't replicate. Not with copper tools, not with ramps, not in 20 years, and certainly not with a population barely out of the Stone Age. Let's talk the Osirian, located at Abydos. The Osirian is one of the strangest structures in Egypt, sunken below ground level, constructed from massive granite blocks weighing 50 to 100 tons each, and using a style of construction that doesn't match anything else from its alleged time period. The official narrative dates it to Seti I, but the construction is so drastically different from his other temples that many suspect it predates dynastic Egypt by millennia. Sound familiar? It should, because it's not just the architecture, it's the purpose. According to myth, this was where Osiris was buried. But why bury a god in a megalithic water-cooled granite box? Unless Osiris wasn't a god, unless he was a king, and the Osirian wasn't a tomb, it was a machine. Some fringe researchers believe it was part of an ancient energy system, a power plant, or a resonance chamber, or a hydraulic device. Why? Because of the water, the granite, the layout, all of which match the needs for generating piezoelectric energy, a power source. One that might have powered what? Well, let's loop back to Dendera, to the light bulbs, to the helicopter, hieroglyphs, to the pyramid shafts that could have channeled microwave energy, to a civilization that didn't separate spirituality and science, that used geometry and vibration as tools. Sound crazy? Then explain why we can't build the Great Pyramid today with modern cranes. Explain why we don't understand how the stones were cut, moved, and placed with surgical precision. Explain why there's not a single depiction of pyramid construction anywhere in Egyptian art. Not one. Because maybe they didn't build them. Maybe they found them. Like discovering an iPhone in a cave. And that brings us back to Osiris. In myth, he is dismembered and scattered. But in symbol, he is rebirth. He is resurrection. He is the embodiment of a civilization that died but refused to disappear. The Osirian civilization didn't fall. It transformed into Egypt, into legend, into gods. And if the Osirian builders were real, if they encoded their knowledge in stone, buried their machines in temples, and allowed themselves to be mythologized, then we have been staring at our ancestors and calling them cartoon. But the Osirians are not alone. Another city older still was buried, not by sand or story, but by design. And when it surfaced, it shattered everything. 7 lost civilizations down. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. If you're still here, you're built for this. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Let's see how far across time and place this story really reaches. Göbekli Tepe, it was never supposed to exist. When archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered the first T-shaped monolith in 1994, the academic world blinked, scratched its head, and checked the date. Because what stood before him, half buried in the hills of southeastern Turkey, was not a primitive site, not a random stone circle. It was architecture, and it was older than anything ever found. Göbekli Tepe, literally Potbelly Hill, doesn't just break the timeline of civilization. It burns, it buries the ashes, and then carves an obelisk about it just to gloat. Dated to around 9,600. Before Common Era, it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. The Egyptian pyramids by over 7,000. Agriculture, riding the wheel, all came later. And yet here it stands, not a ruin of a tribe, not the leftovers of hunter-gatherers, but a cathedral, a temple, a cosmic machine of stone and symbol. And it wasn't just built, it was buried deliberately carefully, as if someone wanted it forgotten. So what the hell is Göbekli Tepe? Let's start with what we know. The site consists of at least 20 circular enclosures, only a handful of which have been fully excavated. Each circle contains massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 18 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are arranged in pairs facing each other across the circle, like frozen giants locked in conversation. Some are bare, others are carved with images, foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, lions, predators, omen symbols, and then there's Pillar 43, the vulture stone, a scene etched into the surface interpreted by some as an astronomical chart, a depiction of constellations, a memory of the sky. But here's where things tilt into madness. Some researchers, particularly the team behind the 2017 paper published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, suggest that Pillar 43 records a cataclysm, specifically the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a proposed comet strike around 10,800 before Common Era that triggered a sudden return to Ice Age conditions, killing off megafauna and possibly wiping out advanced prehistoric societies. In other words, Göbekli Tepe may be not just a temple. It may be a warning, a time capsule left behind by a civilization that survived something the rest of the world forgot. A message in stone. We were here. We saw the sky burn, and we remembered. Now hold that thought, because here's the kicker. Göbekli Tepe was built by people who were supposed to be illiterate, disorganized, and nomadic. The standard model of human development tells us agriculture came first. Farming led to surplus. Surplus led to cities. Cities led to civilization. But Göbekli Tepe flips the script. There was no farming here, no permanent settlement. Yet someone mobilized massive labor forces. Someone quarried and transported stone. Someone had the astronomical and architectural knowledge to align structures with celestial events. Someone created culture before agriculture, which means the builders were not primitive. They were post-something. What if they weren't rising out of savagery? What if they were remembering, rebuilding, recovering from a fall? Because something doesn't add up, why build such a massive complex only to bury it? Why hide it under tons of backfill, layer by layer like a tomb? Archaeologists agree. The burial wasn't the work of erosion or nature. It was intentional, systematic, almost reverent, as if the builders knew it wasn't for them, as if they were preserving it for a time when it would be needed, maybe us. And remember, only 5% of the site has been excavated. We are looking at the surface of a civilization's iceberg. Beneath the soil, literally miles of untouched structures, may lie the real story, the real tech, the real memory. Some suggest Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone. Across Anatolia, other sites are being uncovered. Karahan Tepe'ne bağlı Çori Sayburç. Similar architecture, similar symbols, similar. Shoka network, a system not isolated, not accidental. A civilization, one that we never knew, existed, one that might have seeded everything else. Because here's the truly dangerous idea. What if Egypt didn't teach the world? What if Mesopotamia didn't invent civilization? What if they inherited it? What if the spark came from Göbekli Tepe? And what if Göbekli Tepe's builders were not inventing religion, art, and science, but trying to reconstruct it? A cultural black box, a manual for civilization, a cry across time. This is how you do it. This is how you survive. Remember the stars. Remember the beasts. Remember the rhythm of the earth and the breath of the gods. Even the layout of the enclosures, concentric circles radiating design, feels ritualistic. Cosmic, not random. These were not campsites. These were altars, calendars, maps, and maybe even machines. Some researchers believe the layout of the pillars combined with the acoustics of the enclosures suggests resonant properties that sound rituals were performed. Chanting, drumming vibrations that could induce trance or transmit knowledge, that Göbekli functioned as a brain, not just a temple, a device for consciousness. A transmitter sound crazy? Then explain why a people without writing carved abstract symbols, H-like glyphs, serpentine lines, and non-figurative shapes into every stone. Symbols that don't match any known protoscript, but appear to communicate something. It's as if they knew writing would come later, but memory couldn't wait. So what happened? Why bury it? Some think they foresaw the collapse, that the memory of the cataclysm was still raw. The skies had burned once. They could burn again, so they hid their wisdom not in books, but in bedrock, hoping someone would one day listen. That day may be now. Because with every new discovery, drone scan, every dig site, Göbekli Tepe grows louder. It is not a site frozen in time. It is a fuse. Karahan Tepe. If Göbekli Tepe cracked open the story of civilization, then Karahan Tepe blew the back wall clean off. Located just 35 kilometers southeast of its more famous sibling Karahan Tepe, doesn't bask in the same international spotlight yet. But in the hushed corridors of archaeology and the fevered forums of alternative history, it's becoming something else entirely. The missing piece, the deeper layer, the before to Göbekli Tepe's after. Because if Göbekli Tepe was an anomaly, Karahan Tepe makes it a pattern. What was once an isolated marvel is now part of a network what Turkish archaeologists call the Taş-Tepeler region, a constellation of prehistoric sites across southeastern Anatolia that collectively push the timeline of complex society so far back it breaks. But Karahan Tepe is different. It's stranger, bolder. Discovered in the 1990s, but only seriously excavated since 2019, the site reveals a level of architectural daring and symbolic obsession that makes Göbekli Tepe look almost modest, where Göbekli offered subtlety, Karahan Tepe shouts. Its centerpiece, a room of stone penises. Yes, you read that right. Carved out of the bedrock itself, one of the site's main enclosures contains a circle of upright T-shaped pillars, and in the middle, a series of smooth, unmistakably phallic columns rising from the floor. They aren't decorative. They aren't random. They're ritual. This is prehistoric architecture at its most unapologetically symbolic. And it gets weirder. In the same chamber sits a human face carved into the stone wall. Not a full statue. Just a head eyes wide, mouth open, emerging like a god being born from the stone. It's positioned to stare directly at the circle of phallic columns, as if witnessing or judging some primordial rite. What does it mean? Nobody knows. And that's the point. Karahan Tepe forces us to confront a version of prehistory that isn't primitive or accidental, but intentional. These people didn't just stack rocks. They carved symbolism into bedrock. They organized space with mathematical precision. They created spaces to invoke something, whether God's ancestors or the deep architecture of human memory. And they did it 12,000 years ago, before the wheel, before agriculture, before recorded time. Let that timeline sink in. Mainstream archaeology still clings to the idea that human civilization began around 3000 before Common Era with the Sumerians. That before that, we were just nomads playing with sticks. But Karahan Tepe stands like a stone middle finger to that narrative, because you don't carve temples into hillsides by accident. You don't align monoliths with stars, unless you've been watching the sky for generations. You don't summon geometry from a tent. You do it because you remember something older, maybe something lost. Let's talk tech, not iPhones. Cognitive technology. The ability to plan, to organize labor, to encode meaning into architecture. These are not luxuries of civilization. They are civilization. And Karahan Tepe has all of them. And then some recent discoveries include a massive carved pillar over 7 meters tall, rising from a perfectly circular chamber. Subterranean tunnel systems carved directly into limestone, water channels and basins that suggest not just ritual cleansing, but perhaps even rudimentary plumbing. Human and animal figurines with exaggerated features, eyes, limbs, genitals hinting at symbolic language or ancestral worship. And here's the kicker. Just like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe was deliberately buried. Why? Why spend decades, maybe centuries, carving sacred spaces out of solid rock, only to backfill them? It's not abandonment, it's preservation. These weren't collapsing societies. They were concealing something, knowledge, power, or just memory, too dangerous to leave exposed. One theory gaining traction, Karahan Tepe and its neighboring sites weren't just temples. They were the heart of a pre-flood civilization, a culture with spiritual practices, astronomical knowledge, and social organization that rivals what we see thousands of years later in Mesopotamia and Egypt. In other words, these people weren't learning, they were remembering, rebuilding in the aftermath of catastrophe. Let's go cosmological for a second. Many of Karahan Tepe's features align with celestial phenomena. The enclosures appear to map solar cycles. Some alignments hint at knowledge of lunar eclipses, and those underground chambers, they resonate literally. Acoustic engineers have noted strange sound properties inside the stone, enclosure stones, that amplify and echo in ways that suggest the use of vibration in ritual. This isn't just architecture, it's psychoacoustic engineering. A Stone Age sound temple, a place where vibration met vibration. where chanting or drumming could alter perception, perhaps even induce altered states. Now combine that with the phallic symbolism, with the carved faces, with the subterranean depths. Karahan Tepe wasn't a city. It wasn't a fortress. It was a womb, a place of rebirth, of transformation, a sacred engine designed not to produce food or weapons but consciousness. And the people who built it, they came from somewhere. We don't know where. We don't know how. But they didn't come out of nowhere. Maybe they were survivors, refugees of a drowned world. Lemurians, Atlanteans, Rama engineers, stripped of their vimanas, wandering across Anatolia with nothing but memory and stone. Maybe they were locals who inherited the ruins and rebuilt in their image. Or maybe, just maybe, they were the origin, the architects of the reset, the ones who knew the flood would come and carve their culture into stone, not because they wanted to last forever, but because they knew nothing else would. Karahan Tepe is not the start. It's the scar, the mark of a civilization that burned so brightly it left shadows we still can't explain. And those shadows stretch far into the soil of Sumer, into the whispers of Egypt, into the coded myths of every people who speak of a golden age, drowned in darkness. Karahan Tepe is the skeleton key, but it doesn't unlock the past. It unlocks the lie that we rose once linearly from ape to astronaut, the truth we've risen before. Ancient Sumer, pre-dynastic. If civilization had a birth certificate, it would probably be written in cuneiform and stamped in Sumer. Located in the marshy cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer is the first place where the human story stops whispering and starts shouting. Cities, kings, laws, war, trade, math, beer. It's all there, carved into clay and stone. The Sumerians didn't just emerge from the fog of prehistory. They burned through it, bringing fire, language, and bureaucracy to a world still stuck in the mud. But what if they weren't the beginning? What if they were the inheritors? Because buried beneath the concrete timelines of mainstream archaeology is a quieter, stranger truth. The Sumerians themselves tried to tell us. They said they came from somewhere else. Let's rewind. Textbooks will tell you that Sumer was born around 4,500 before Common Era, with the appearance of Uruk and Eridu temples rising like stone mushrooms in the swampy plains of southern Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians didn't write about starting civilization. They wrote about remembering it. According to their own king, list a bizarre, spine-tingling document etched into clay. They were ruled before the flood, not by tribal chieftains or wandering shamans, by kings and cities, for tens of thousands of years. Let's go slow here. The Sumerian king list begins by stating plainly, after the kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. That's the first city, the blueprint, the cradle. But here's the kicker. Those early rulers didn't reign for decades or even centuries. They reigned for millennia. One king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, for 36,000. Sound ridiculous? Sure, unless it's not, because the king list also notes a division in time before the flood and after. The flood is the inflection point, the great leveler. And the story it tells of cities, kings, and the great deluge isn't unique. It mirrors the biblical flood, the epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Ziusudra, and echoes through every ancient civilization like thunder in a canyon. So what came before the flood? That's the mystery. That's the madness. That's the myth. The pre-dynastic Sumerians, we believe their texts were not primitive. They were part of a world system that vanished in water. They didn't invent writing to figure things out. They invented it to remember what had been lost. Cuneiform wasn't born out of invention. It was born out of mourning. Let's talk gods. The Sumerian pantheon is crowded. Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Nana. Sky gods, storm gods, water gods, gods of love and war, and agricultural ledgers. But here's the twist. These weren't ethereal concepts. These were rulers, physical beings who lived, fought, traveled in flying chariots, and handed down laws. Sound familiar? It should. These are the watchers of the Book of Enoch, the sons of God in Genesis, the beings that descended, interfered, and then left, or were buried, beneath the earth. In Sumerian myth, Enki builds the first city, teaches humans agriculture, and warns of an impending flood. He is both savior and scientist. And the Anunnaki. Oh, the Anunnaki. popularized and pulverized by fringe theorists, the Anunnaki are described in Sumerian texts as beings who from heaven to earth came. They aren't vague spiritual concepts. They have roles, jobs, interpersonal drama. They dig canals, argue over who gets to rule cities, and get into fights that sound suspiciously like interdepartmental office squabbles. They sometimes involve weapons that could melt mountains. There's a word for that technology. Some scholars will wave this away as metaphor. Others point out that we still don't fully understand how Sumerians knew what they knew. Their understanding of astronomy was off the charts. They knew about planetary motion, lunar cycles, and even precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, long before the Greeks discovered it. How? By staring at the sky with the naked eye, or because someone told them, someone who remembered? The deeper you go, the more unsettling it gets. Take Eridu, first city located near modern-day Abu Sharain. Eridu is considered by archaeologists to be the oldest city in southern Mesopotamia, perhaps the world. But it didn't start small. The earliest layers of Eridu already show signs of organized planning, monumental architecture, and religious hierarchy. No mud huts, no trial and error, just boom civilization. That's not evolution, that's inheritance. Eridu's temple to Enki the Iabzu was rebuilt over 16 times on the same spot, each layer taller, each layer more complex. Why? To maintain a memory, to keep the ritual space alive, to reach something that had fallen. Let's talk ziggurats. Massive stepped platforms, not just religious buildings, but cosmic connectors, microcosms of the universe. And they didn't emerge gradually. They appeared fully formed with mathematical precision and celestial alignment. Many of these structures were aligned with specific stars and planets. The temple at Eridu may have aligned with Sirius, the dog star, sacred in Egyptian myth, and referenced in nearly every ancient sky-oriented culture. Why align stone with stars? Why track the heavens so obsessively? Because they weren't just watching the sky. They were waiting for the return of something, or the memory of something. And then there's the math. Sumerians developed the base 60 number system that we still use today for time and angles. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees. Why 60? Why not 10? Because it's divisible. Because it's modular. Because it's engineered. They also knew about the so-called sacred geometry ratios and harmonic structures that would later appear in Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, and Gothic cathedrals. So again we ask, did they invent this or remember it? Let's not forget metallurgy, copper tools, bronze smelting, and according to some Mesopotamian texts, access to materials like El-Meshu and Nish, mysterious metals, possibly now lost or mistranslated. There's even mention of flying machines called gigunu used by the gods to cross the heavens. That's not mythology, that's memory and metaphor. And that brings us back to the flood. Every Sumerian city has a version of the flood myth. But it's not just a cautionary tale. It's a pivot point, a reboot, a trauma event encoded in every clay tablet and ritual. The survivors Ziusudra in Sumerian myth, Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh, are not just spared, they're instructed to rebuild, to teach, to carry forward what was nearly lost. So maybe that's what Sumer really was. Not the first civilization, the first restoration, the first attempt to stand up after the fall, to remember to write it down before memory faded again. Because the waters always rise, the towers always fall. But if the story is written in clay, stone, and stars, maybe it can survive. And maybe buried in that memory is a clue. A map to a city even older. A place of light and purity. A place called Dilmun. Dilmun. Dilmun is where the gods go to retire. That's how the Sumerians described it. A place not of struggle or grandeur, but purity. An oasis of calm. A city so perfect death itself was barred from entry. It was not just a paradise. It was a prototype, a control group for creation. But here's the twist. Dilmun wasn't just myth. It was on the map. Somewhere in the haze of antiquity, this mythic Eden started showing up in trade records, royal correspondence, and ancient shipping manifests. Copper pearls, lapis lazuli heading to and from a place called Dilmun, and then it vanished. Like Eden, like Atlantis, like every too perfect thing. Let's begin where the story usually ends, with the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the half-divine king of Uruk fails to cheat death, he sets off on a journey across the ocean, through the tunnel of the sun, to find Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, who survived the flood and was granted immortality. Where does he find him Dilmun? And what is Dilmun A? Land where the raven does not croak, where no old woman says, "I am old," where the lion does not kill nor does the wolf devour. No death, no decay, just eternal sparkling stillness. But this isn't just poetic fluff. The Sumerians weren't talking about heaven. They were describing a real place east of their cities across the Persian Gulf. And archaeologists think they may have found it on the island of Bahrain. That's the mainstream theory anyway. But something doesn't add up. Because the site on Bahrain, known as Qalat al-Bahrain, shows signs of ancient urbanization temples, burial mounds, trade hubs, but it doesn't match the scale, scope, or sacredness of the Dilmun described in Sumerian myth. And then there's the age. The Sumerians were writing about Dilmun as early as 3000 before Common Era. But they weren't claiming to have founded it. They said it had always been there, that Enki, god of wisdom, brought life to Dilmun before even the rivers flowed. In the Sumerian creation myth, Enki impregnates the land of Dilmun with water, transforming it from a lifeless rock into a paradise. He builds canals, plants fruit trees, and watches over the birth of humanity. So let's ask the forbidden question. Was Dilmun the origin, not metaphorically, literally? Was it the seed civilization? The place where memory survived the flood and flowed outward first to Sumer, then to Egypt, then to every other forgotten empire, echoing its design? Let's follow the clues. Dilmun was described as an island, a sacred land, where gods met, a hub of trade and transcendence, but also a place with technology. In one myth, the god Enki sends messages to Dilmun using messengers of light. In another, he becomes ill and calls upon his healing priestess Ninhursag, who diagnoses his ailments organ by organ. Medical science, remote communication, advanced agriculture. Not bad for a culture that's supposed to be prehistoric. And let's not forget the architecture. The temples of Dilmun, what little remains of them, are built on ziggurat-like foundations, multi-level structures designed not just for ritual, but as cosmic connectors, altars to the sky, stairways to the stars. And then there's the copper. Dilmun wasn't just a spiritual haven, it was a metallurgical powerhouse. The region's trade records show an enormous influx of copper flowing from Oman through Dilmun and into Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. This wasn't small-scale barter. This was industrial. Some scholars believe the copper trade alone suggests a level of organization that rivals early dynastic cities. But why copper? Because copper isn't just useful, it's symbolic. In many ancient traditions, copper is associated with Venus, with the goddess Inanna, with fertility and rebirth. It conducts energy. It kills bacteria. It glows with a soft, otherworldly hue. Maybe they weren't just trading metal. Maybe they were trading memory, a fragment of a pre-flood science, a knowledge encoded in the elements. Because the most persistent whisper about Dilmun is this: it wasn't built, it was preserved, a pocket of purity amid a shattered world. A memory palace left untouched by the deluge that drowned Atlantis and erased Rama. A place where the blueprint was kept safe, like a seed bank, like a sacred vault. And maybe that's why the Sumerians wrote about it with such reverence. Not as a place to conquer, but a place to remember. They didn't want to claim it. They wanted to return. And here's where things get weird. Because if Dilmun really was a center of something greater, a node in a forgotten network, then it's not alone. Similar myths pop up everywhere. A shining land to the east, a sacred island where gods walk. In Indian lore, it's Pushkara. In Persian myth, it's Ariana Vija. In Greek tales, it's the Hesperides. Always east, always shining, always just out of reach. But what if Dilmun was real? What if it was the original sanctuary, the last ember of an earlier fire? And if so, where did its people go? Some believe they became the Akkadians, others the Elamites. But maybe they didn't vanish into empire. Maybe they went underground. Maybe they became the architects of Eridu the priests, the anonymous builders of the ziggurats, whose foundations we still can't explain. Because like all pre-flood civilizations, Dillman leaves behind, not answers, but echoes, trade routes, with no origin legends, with no ending temples, with no purpose. But perhaps the most haunting clue is this. When Gilgamesh arrives at Dillman to seek immortality, he finds Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, the keeper of the old ways. And what does Utnapishtim tell him? You're too late. The gates are closed. The memory is fading. And that's what Dillman is. A memory with doors that won't open. A paradise that wasn't lost to sin, but to silence. And that silence stretches farther than Mesopotamia. It reaches deeper than the Persian Gulf. Because the next city on our journey isn't sacred. It's forgotten. It wasn't the cradle. It was the first. Eridu. In the ruins of Eridu, you can hear the sound of beginnings. Not just the birth of a city or the start of a civilization, but the first breath of everything we now call history. It doesn't look like much. Just a few crumbling mounds in the southern tip of Iraq, near the edge of the ancient marshlands. But under that dust lies a story older than empires, older than myths, older even than memory. This isn't where civilization began. It's where it restarted. The Sumerians said so themselves. Eridu was the first city, the first temple, the first throne. According to the Sumerian king list, after the kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu, not Ur, not Uruk, not Babylon. Eridu, a name that echoes like thunder through the earliest clay tablets ever pressed by human hands. But it didn't rise with a whimper. It arrived fully formed. Eridu didn't grow. It was placed like someone rolled out a divine carpet and said, "Start here." That alone is suspicious, but it gets weirder. The earliest levels of Eridu date back to at least 5,400 before Common Era, maybe earlier. Beneath its crumbling ziggurats and half-erased walls lies evidence of 17 layers of temple construction, on top of the other, built in the exact same spot, each layer more complex, more refined, as if someone was desperately trying to reconstruct something they could no longer remember clearly. A memory made of mud brick, layered like trauma. But why rebuild the same temple 17 times? Why not start fresh? Because they weren't trying to innovate. They were trying to remember to get it right. The central structure was the Abzu, the house of the deep-water temple of Enki, god of wisdom, magic, and underground rivers. Enki wasn't just a deity, he was a keeper of secrets. The guardian of Me, the sacred laws that governed everything from agriculture to architecture to moral codes. And in the mythologies, Enki didn't write these laws. He rescued them from the flood, from the dark, from whatever came before. Which raises a terrible question. What kind of knowledge needs rescuing? Eridu's sacredness wasn't in its size or splendor. It wasn't built to dominate. It was built to preserve, to safeguard something fragile, something dangerous, something holy, like the schematic of a lost world. Let's talk about the Abzu. In Sumerian cosmology, the Abzu was the primeval sea beneath the earth, the source of all fresh water and wisdom. Enki's temple at Eridu was said to sit on top of the literal entrance to this underworld sea. Rituals there weren't just prayers. They were activations attempts to connect with the deep. That's not religion. That's interface. Scholars often interpret the Abzu as a symbol. But what if it wasn't? What if the temple was built to access something real, an underground water source? Yes, but also a frequency, a resonance, a library stored in stone and vibration. Think about it. Why build 17 temples in the exact same spot? Why keep returning to this spot unless something was there, unless they were trying to reactivate it? Now let's look at what came next. The cities that followed Urlagash-Kishnipur borrowed from Eridu's blueprint. Religious centers surrounded by concentric layers of administrative buildings, marketplaces, and homes, all aligned with the stars, all designed to reflect cosmic order. But none of them dared claim the title of first. They all remembered Eridu, because Eridu wasn't just a city. It was a myth in real time, a relic of a civilization that had survived the unthinkable. We've seen this before, in the burial of Göbekli Tepe, in the flood myths of Sumer, in the echoing lines of Plato's Atlantis. The pattern is always the same. Something great rises. Something terrible happens. Survivors rebuild not from scratch, but from memory. And Eridu is the clearest example we have. a post-cataclysmic capital, a knowledge bunker, a temple built not for the living but for the future. And what's buried in its layers? Artifacts that shouldn't be there, tools that suggest metallurgy, pottery with iconography that doesn't match any known local traditions, symbolism that echoes across continents, serpents, circles, stars, the same motifs found in India, in Egypt, and Peru. How does the same symbolic language show up in cultures allegedly separated by thousands of miles and millennia? Unless they weren't separate, unless they were descendants of something shared, something centralized, something like Eridu. Because the Sumerians didn't say they built civilization. They said they revived it. That kingship descended from heaven again. That cities rose again. That knowledge returned not spontaneously, but through inheritance. And if Eridu was the delivery point, then what came before it? What catastrophe shattered the original civilization so thoroughly that only fragments could be passed down? Was it the Younger Dryas impact, a solar flare, a war? We don't know. But Eridu is the scar tissue, the healed wound, the place where the survivors put their hands back in the clay and said, "Start again." It wasn't about innovation, it was about salvage, preserving enough to matter, forgetting enough to survive. And maybe that's why Eridu feels so haunting. Because it's not just the first city, it's the last memory, the final whisper of a world that died so that ours could begin. But Eridu wasn't alone. Just up the river, another city rose, less sacred, more administrative, but no less mysterious. A city where the gods met in council, where the calendar began, where power took root in the soil of myth. Its name was Nippur. Nippur. There is a silence that lingers in ruins, a kind of pressure in the air like the ghost of attention, the memory of something watching. In Nippur, that silence isn't empty. It's waiting. Because Nippur wasn't just a city. It was the city. Not the largest, not the richest, but the most sacred. If Eridu was the beginning of memory, Nippur was where that memory was made official, where the myths were refined into scripture, where the wild power of origin was brought into line, stamped in clay, and sealed with the authority of the gods. But not all the gods, just one. Enlil the Storm Lord, the king of heaven and earth, the one who destined kingship and held the tablets of destiny, cosmic hard drives that encoded the structure of the universe. In Sumerian mythology, Enlil didn't just command wind and weather. He decided fate, and his house, the Ekur, literally mountain house, was at the center of Nippur. Built like a ziggurat, but older than most, the Ekur was more than a temple. It was a divine courtroom, a meeting place for gods, a cosmic embassy between the mortal and the eternal. And what did they meet to discuss the fate of humanity? Let's start there. Nippur was the seat of celestial legislation. Before kings could rule anywhere in Mesopotamia, they had to be recognized by Nippur's priests, not just politically, but cosmically. No coronation counted, unless Nippur said so. It was the Vatican and the Pentagon rolled into one, and its power didn't come from armies or gold. It came from memory because Nippur was where the calendar was born. The Sumerians, like many ancient cultures, tracked time through the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, but they did more than observe. They calculated with terrifying accuracy. Lunar eclipses, solstices, the precession of the equinoxes, all tracked, all logged, all calibrated. And it all centered on Nippur. The priests here weren't just spiritual leaders. They were mathematicians, astronomers, timekeepers, time lords. Let's unpack that. The Sumerian calendar was lunar 12 months, adjusted periodically, with an intercalary month to keep the seasons aligned. Sounds simple. It's not. It requires advanced observation, mathematical modeling, and a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. The kind of system you build when you're not trying to figure things out, but trying to preserve what you already know. In other words, inheritance again. And what about the layout? Like other Sumerian cities, Nippur was built around a central ziggurat, aligned with the cardinal points and likely the stars. But beneath the city, excavations have revealed levels of construction that predate the known city by thousands of years, foundations that don't match the rest of the architecture, walls of unknown origin, and fragments of pottery tools, and stone tablets that suggest a culture more advanced than its supposed time. Some archaeologists whisper about a ghost layer, a pre-Sumerian stratum that doesn't belong, that shouldn't exist. But it does, because Nippur, like Eridu, was not built once. It was built over, again and again, temple over temple, sanctuary over sanctuary, memory over memory, a ziggurat of forgetting. And yet, something always leaks through. Let's talk texts. Nippur was the birthplace of many of the Sumerian myths we know today. It's where the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, was first compiled, where the Sumerian king list was likely edited, where the myth of Enlil's decision to flood the world was first etched into clay. You see a pattern. The flood again. Always the flood. In the myths, Enlil is the one who decides humanity must be destroyed. He finds us noisy, rebellious, dangerous. And so he sends the deluge. But it's not just a tantrum, it's a reset, a forced formatting of the hard drive. And the survivors are not spared at random. They are selected. In the Atrahasis, another text preserved in Nippur, a figure named Ziusudra is warned by Enki, Enlil's more sympathetic brother. He builds a boat, survives, rebuilds. You know the story. But the key detail is that the knowledge was saved, not the people, the memory, the calendar, the law, the rhythm. That's what mattered. Nippur wasn't just sacred. It was a server farm, a temple that backed up the cosmic operating system after the flood wiped the mainframe. And here's where it gets dark. Because Nippur was also the center of a quiet war. Not one fought with swords, but with symbols. Enlil and Enki, order and chaos, authority and freedom. The myths tell of divine conflicts, exiles, rival temples, a civil war among gods that played out in ritual, in song, in architecture. What if that wasn't fiction? What if it was memory? What if Nippur and Eridu weren't just religious centers, but opposing nodes of an ancient philosophical split? Enlil demanded submission. Enki offered knowledge. One flooded the world, the other saved it. And we, the descendants, have been living in the fallout ever since. Because the myths encoded in Nippur didn't fade. They spread to Akkad, to Babylon, to Canaan, Egypt, Greece. Changed names, changed faces, but the bones stayed the same. Creation, rebellion, flood, rescue, reset, over and over again. And maybe Nippur wasn't just a city. Maybe it was a firewall, a safeguard built after the last cataclysm designed to manage the next. But whatever it was, it didn't last. The memory frayed, the symbols blurred, and eventually, Nippur faded into ruins. But not before it passed the torch to a place across the ocean, a city with no name, no king, no writing, only stone, only silence, only scale. Its name is Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, pre-classical Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan doesn't whisper history. It stands there hulking, angular, and deathly silent, like a monument carved by something that knew too much. Its pyramids loom across the Valley of Mexico, like fossilized thunder, vast enough to baffle, precise enough to unnerve. Tourists shuffle up the Avenue of the Dead with cameras and sunscreen. But they have no idea, because Teotihuacan is not what it seems. It's not Aztec, not Maya, not Olmec. When the Aztecs arrived in the valley centuries after it was already abandoned, they didn't claim it. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. That's not a title you give a suburb. That's reverence. That's terror. Because when they found it, the city was already a skeleton, already dead, already covered in centuries of moss myth and stone silence. No one remembered who built it. No one remembered why. But everyone agreed it wasn't human. Not entirely. Let's look at the raw numbers. At its peak around the 1st century Common Era, Teotihuacan was the 6th largest city on Earth. Over 125,000 people lived in a sprawling metropolis of precise geometry and cosmic alignment. The entire city was constructed on a north-south grid, with the main Avenue of the Dead aligned 15.5 degrees east of true north, possibly to point directly at the setting of the Pleiades, or perhaps to match the sun's movement on a specific date, or maybe for a purpose we still don't comprehend. That's the pattern, isn't it? We don't understand. Not the layout, not the timeline, not the builders, because they're gone completely. No names, no signatures, no king lists or cuneiform, just ruins and mysteries. Start with the pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun stands 216 feet tall and was once covered in a layer of gleaming white plaster that reflected the sun like a beacon. Beneath it lies a cave natural modified enigmatic. Some believe it represents the underworld. Others think it's a womb, a tunnel to a lost technology, a remnant of something older. There's even a central shaft beneath the pyramid, a vertical passage drilled deep into the bedrock. Why, nobody knows, but it suggests vertical energy movement, resonance, and axis. The Pyramid of the Moon, at the north end of the Avenue of the Dead, is equally peculiar. It mirrors the shape of the Cerro Gordo mountain behind it, deliberately, symbolically, cosmically. The pyramid wasn't just built on the earth. It was designed to reflect the earth, or perhaps what came before it. Then there's the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. This structure is the most elaborately decorated of the three major pyramids. Its facade is adorned with dozens of stylized serpent heads and intricate iconography, many of which seem to reference water, fire, and motion. Beneath it, archaeologists discovered a tunnel. A tunnel filled with mercury. Yes, mercury. Pools of its sealed chambers, liquid metal glimmering in the dark. Mercury is toxic, dangerous, but also symbolic. It was believed to be a portal, a material bridge between worlds. In ancient China and India, mercury was associated with immortality. In alchemy, it was a sacred element. In Teotihuacan, we don't know, because the texts are gone, or never existed. What we have is architecture, and that's where the mystery lies, because the entire city is encoded not just aesthetically, but mathematically and astronomically. Many researchers have noted that Teotihuacan's layout reflects the solar system. The distances between the pyramids correspond to the relative distances between planets. The Pyramid of the Sun sits at the center. The Pyramid of the Moon offset represents Earth's position. The entire city becomes a model not just of the heavens, but of movement of orbital mechanics in stone, 2,000 years ago, without telescopes, without computers. Unless that wasn't when it was constructed. Let's dig deeper, because some believe the dating is off. That Teotihuacan was built much earlier than the 1st century before Common Era. That it predates the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, even the Olmecs. That it could stretch back to 2000 before Common Era or beyond. The issue is the same as always: lack of organic material. Radiocarbon dating of the structures is nearly impossible. So we date around them based on pottery, nearby burials, or artistic styles. But what if the core was already ancient when the first potter arrived? What if they inherited it? And here's the thing. The core structures are megalithic. Not adobe, not brickstone fitted angular built for endurance. The kind of endurance you'd want if you were trying to preserve knowledge, power, or memory. Some theorists propose Teotihuacan wasn't a city at all, but a machine, a resonant engine, a geoelectrical node in a forgotten grid of planetary harmonics. They point to the use of mica, a rare mineral with insulating properties found in buried chambers, to magnetic anomalies, to the tunnels beneath the pyramids, to the alignment with solar zenith points. They suggest it wasn't built to live in. It was built to function. As what? A transmitter? A beacon? A factory? We don't know, but we feel it. Walk through the Avenue of the Dead at dusk, and the shadows stretch too far. Stand atop the Pyramid of the Sun at noon, and the wind doesn't just blow, it hums. There's something in the stone, in the silence. Something preserved. The Aztecs believed it was a place where gods were born. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's where gods died and left their tools behind. Because Teotihuacan doesn't answer questions, it poses them. It disrupts the carefully constructed timeline of New World archaeology. It suggests someone was here, someone who knew more than they should have, someone who didn't need writing because they had geometry, they had stone. And if that's true, then what came before it? Who taught the builders? Where did they go? Some believe they moved south, that they scattered like seeds in the wind, and that their next incarnation wasn't in the highlands, but in the desert. Where? The oldest city in the Americas lies beneath layers of sand, memory, and bone. Its name is Karl-Sup, Peru. It looks unremarkable. Just wind-blown stones and sun-bleached terraces on a parched patch of coastal desert 200 kilometers north of Lima. No grand pyramids, No golden idols, no war gods glaring from temple walls. But that's the deception. Carol doesn't shout, it whispers. And in that whisper is the oldest city in the Americas. Welcome to Carol Supe. Dated to at least 2600 before Common Era, and possibly older. Caral is older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than the Indus Valley, older than Babylon. It rises like a mirage from the Soup Valley, a perfectly preserved urban complex that rewrites the history of the New World every time we examine it closely. But what makes Carol truly unsettling isn't its age, it's what's absent. No weapons, no walls, no graves, filled with warrior elites. This wasn't a city of conquest, it was a city of order. And that makes it even more suspicious. Because Carol doesn't fit the textbook model where agriculture leads to hierarchy to conflict, and conflict to walls and empires. But Carol bypassed that. It had none of the defensive features we expect from early civilizations. Instead, it had pyramids, plazas, sunken amphitheaters, and irrigation canals. Not one or two dozens arranged with mathematical precision, aligned to the stars. A city that didn't evolve, it emerged, planned, measured, remembered. Let's consider the scale. The Caral complex spans more than 150 acres and includes at least 6 massive pyramidal structures. The largest, known as the Great Pyramid, rises over 90 feet, built not from crude stone, but finely layered terraces of earth and ash. The pyramid was engineered to withstand earthquakes. Yes, engineered. Think about that. A Stone Age society with no known metallurgy or wheels creating seismic-resistant architecture in a high-risk earthquake zone. That's not improvisation. That's engineering. But where did the knowledge come from? Caral's builders left no written records, but they left ropes, or rather quipus-knotted cords, used by the Inca 1,000 years later. Here at Caral, we find their ancestors, or perhaps their instructors, knotted cords buried alongside children, stored in ceremonial spaces strung across altars. Communication without writing, computation without numerals. Data encoded in threads like a Stone Age hard drive. And then there's the music. Flutes crafted from condor bones, cornets made from deer and llama, not hidden in homes or scattered in dumps, but placed with reverence in temples and ceremonial platforms. This was not a people learning to build a city. This was a people who already knew, and their knowledge extended beyond sound. It reached the stars. Caral's city layout appears astronomically aligned. Certain structures mark solstices and equinoxes. Others point to celestial events we're still deciphering. The sunken circular plazas were likely designed for ceremonial sound and sky-watching amphitheaters of observation. Now, ask yourself who needs a cosmic calendar, a farmer, a priest, or a survivor. Because what if Caral isn't the beginning? What if it's the middle? What if its calmness, its absence of war is not innocence, but memory? What if these people remembered what came before, what was lost, and chose never to repeat it? Because the silence in Caral is not peaceful. It's heavy. There are no idols, no written doctrine, no god kings ruling over the masses, just shared space, open plazas and pyramids, not for burials, but for gatherings. That's not religion. That's ritual memory. And here's the part nobody discusses. The people of Caral vanished. Not in war, not in fire. They just left. The city was abandoned around 1800 before Common Era. Its structures were slowly buried by time and sand. No signs of famine, no evidence of plague, just absence. Like a choice, like the final note of a song, only a few could hear. But fragments remained. Their influence spread across the Andes, rippling into later civilizations like the Chavin, the Mosh, the Inca, but always diminished, always echoing something greater. Because Caral didn't fade. It was dismantled, taken apart, not to be destroyed, but to be remembered. And its builders, they didn't start from nothing. They arrived with geometry in their bones, with instruments in their hands, with the sky in their hearts, and perhaps with stories of a flood they never wanted to repeat. Because that's the thread running through every pre-flood civilization: Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Teotihuacan, Caral. They didn't rise from nothing. They rose from ashes. They built not to begin, but to begin again. And Caral and its eerie silence might be the loudest cry of all. But across the sea, halfway around the world, another legend stirs. In the rainforests of Southeast Asia and the jungles of India, a kingdom ruled not by men, but by serpents, and not in memory, but in myth. Naga civilization, India, Southeast Asia. They slither between myth and memory, between scripture and speculation. They are never fully visible, only hinted at, in coils and curves, in the undulations of temple carvings, and the whispered fear in ancient texts. The Nagas, half-human, half-serpent deities, demon saviors, destroyers. Their civilization, if you can call it, that doesn't leave behind cities in the conventional sense. No ziggurats, no stone colossi, no roads, only portals, gateways to another world, one underground, underwater, or somewhere else entirely. But here's what keeps emerging. The Nagas weren't just characters in stories. They ruled, they built, and somewhere beneath the sediment of symbolic language lies the core of a lost civilization, a pre-flood empire erased not by time, but by intent. Let's start with the Vedas and the Puranas, ancient Indian texts written in Sanskrit that don't just describe gods and heroes but entire planetary systems, technologies, and wars. The Nagas appear repeatedly, guardians of treasure, lords of Patala, the underworld possessors of immense wisdom and terrifying power. But it's not just literature, it's geography. Many regions across India and Southeast Asia still bear their name: Nagaland, Nagpur, Nagarjunakonda, and more. Not poetic coincidence, but legacy echoes of a real presence. Names carried forward by descendants who only half understood who or what those names originally described. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas are deeply entwined with cosmic cycles. They are not just snake people. They are keepers of knowledge, guardians of the sacred, and in some versions, they are the builders of cities, deep beneath the earth cities, with shining walls, infinite tunnels, and technologies so advanced, they are mistaken for magic. Let's explore Patala. According to Hindu cosmology, Patala is one of the 7 netherworlds layered beneath the earth. But unlike the hells of Western myth, Patala isn't a realm of fire and punishment. It's beautiful, lush, lit by its own sun, flowing with rivers, palaces of crystal and metal towers that gleam in a light not from the sky. And who lives there? The Nagas, described in vivid detail in the Bhagavata Purana. They are sophisticated beings. Some are humanoid with serpentine features. Others are full-bodied serpents with immense intelligence. They live in highly organized societies with kings, queens, warriors, and scholars. Their capital, Bhogavati, is described as a place of impossible architecture and interdimensional portals. So again, the question, myth or memory? Because every culture around India has a serpent people myth. In Cambodia and Laos, the Nagas are seen as ancestors. In Thailand, they are protectors of temples. In Java and Bali, their likeness is carved into nearly every ancient shrine. And in all these myths, the serpent beings aren't evil. They are older. Let's shift to archaeology. In Cambodia's Angkor Wat complex, the most iconic feature isn't just the towering temple spires. It's the causeways guarded by Naga balustrades, 7-headed serpent railings that guide visitors into the sacred core. The symbolism is profound, but the execution is engineering. Giant sandstone serpents, carved with perfect symmetry, woven into the temple's infrastructure. Why serpents? Why not lions, elephants, or deified ancestors? Because the Nagas weren't just symbols, they were remembered. And what were they guarding? Something ancient, older than Angkor, older than Hinduism. Let's turn to Indian temples. In South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, there are underground serpent shrines. Sarpakavu, worshipped with a kind of cautious reverence, not for prosperity, not for peace, but for containment. The belief isn't that the Nagas need us. It's that they allow us to live here, that they hold back, forces beneath the earth, forces they understand, and we don't, which leads to the next thread. The Nagas didn't just live underground. They came from somewhere. In many texts, they arrive in flying palaces, vimanas. Yes, again, with the flying machines. Some vimanas are described as fiery discs, others as palaces that could shrink or grow at will. The Nagas had access to these or built them. In some versions of the Mahabharata, A Naga prince named Takshaka commands fleets of airships. He leads invasions. He destroys cities. He disappears. Not because he was defeated, but because he retreated back into the deep, back into the earth, back into memory. And that's the most disturbing part. The idea that the Nagas didn't die. They withdrew. Their civilization didn't collapse. It recoiled, like a serpent waiting to strike again. Or, more chillingly, watching us fail again. Some modern interpretations suggest the Nagas represent an ancient race, an offshoot of early humans, or a non-human intelligence that went subterranean before the last cataclysm. They didn't try to rebuild on the surface. They didn't broadcast their survival. They just waited, preserved their technology, preserved their genome, preserved their knowledge, not to share, but to inherit when we're gone. That's the thread that ties them to Agartha, to Shambhala, to the subterranean sanctuaries buried beneath every continent. Because maybe the Nagas weren't a one-off. Maybe they were the remnant. Maybe all these pre-flood civilizations we've discussed, Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Kural, didn't vanish. They diverged. Some built stone, some built code, some built myth. But the Nagas, they built below. And now, in the cracks of the earth, in the tectonic sighs, in the underground hums, we might still be hearing them, not calling, just listening, waiting. And if they are, then maybe the next civilization doesn't rise from us. Maybe it slithers up. And that brings us to a stranger tale still. One where life and death aren't opposites, where the gatekeeper of the underworld is not a demon but a judge. His name is Yama, and his kingdom might be the first civilization ever judged. Yama's kingdom, Hindu mythology. Before Abraham, before Osiris, before the concept of a hell was codified in scripture or stone, there was Yama, the god of death, but not the reaper, the king. In Hindu mythology, Yama isn't just a collector of souls. He's a sovereign, a judge, an administrator of cosmic order. And his kingdom, Yamaloka, or Naraka, is not a realm of eternal punishment, but a kind of spiritual processing center, a metaphysical courthouse where the dead are evaluated and their fate assigned. But here's the odd part. It's not just a spiritual concept. Yama's kingdom is described geographically, and what's described doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like a civilization one that existed before death. Let's walk the edge of theology and archaeology. In the Vedic texts, particularly the Rig Veda and the Garuda Purana, Yama is described as the first mortal to die, the first being to cross the threshold. But he doesn't just die. He rules. He becomes the guide, the monarch of a realm beyond human perception. And that realm, it's structured. Cities, palaces, roads, halls, judges, record keepers, devices that scan karma, rivers that dissolve sin. It's not a cloudscape. It's not ethereal nonsense. It's a bureaucracy, a civilization built on consequence. But what if that's not just metaphor? What if Yama's kingdom was not invented to scare children or comfort mourners? What if it was remembered from before the flood, from before memory turned to myth? Because every time we explore Yama's legend, we find echoes of something real. Let's talk geography. Yama's realm is said to be south of Earth, always south. In Hindu cosmology, south is the direction of death. Funerals face south. Offerings to ancestors are made while facing south. It's not arbitrary. It's encoded, but it's also specific. Yama's city, called Samyamana, is described in some texts as lying deep underground, surrounded by walls of iron and fire. Souls reach it via Vaitarani, a blood-red river full of filth and knives. But once across, they enter a city of perfect order, not paradise, not torment. Order. Think about that. Underground, fortified, technologically advanced, filled with complex moral and energetic systems. That's not hell. That's an archive, a processing center. Or maybe, if you look closely, a data vault. And who works there? Not demons. Beings, clerks of karma, scribes, executioners, surgeons of the soul. They use tools, scanners, scales, all described in vivid detail. And what does Yama sit on a throne of judgment, surrounded by Chitragupta, the divine record keeper, who tracks every thought, word, and deed of the living? That's not fantasy. That's infrastructure. So where did this come from? How did a prehistoric culture imagine a death realm so structured, so judicial, so eerily familiar, unless they didn't imagine it, unless they remembered it? Some scholars and mystics argue that Yama's kingdom wasn't a place you go after death, but a place that existed, that in some prehistoric era, long before recorded history, there was a city or society so obsessed with morality, so technologically advanced, that it developed a literal system for processing souls. Not metaphorically, literally. A soul-sorting machine, a judgment engine. And after the flood, after the fires, after the great amnesia, all that remained were the fragments, the stories, the symbols, and Yama. Let's talk technology. The Vedas describe Chitragupta's tablet, a device that records every human's deeds in real time, not after death, but during life. Divine magic or surveillance. Remote data tracking, biometric record keeping. It raises a chilling question. What if someone is keeping track? What if long ago, a civilization built technology to monitor the soul, to measure behavior, thought, intent, and when the world burned, that technology was buried, mythologized, and named Yamaloka? The kingdom didn't die. It just changed frequency. Yama isn't feared. He's respected, called Dharmaraja, king of righteousness. Some traditions suggest he returns periodically to recalibrate, to reboot, to judge not just individuals, but eras. And maybe we're due. Because Yama's kingdom isn't just a place where the dead go, it's a model, a blueprint for what comes after collapse, a system designed to outlast memory, to guide what survives. If you want to rebuild after a flood, a fire, or a fall, you don't start with stones. You start with ethics. And if you can automate that, you're not building a city, you're building civilization 2.0. Maybe that's what Yama did. And maybe that's what we're standing on, a system that still runs even if we can't see the code. But if Yama's kingdom was a reset engine, a soul server, a moral mainframe, it wasn't the only one. Halfway across the world, a different myth tells of 7 cities, glowing, silent, lost, buried not beneath sand or ice, but beneath greed. The 7 cities of Cibola, somewhere in the deserts of the American Southwest, beneath dunes, cliffs, or perhaps a veil of time. There are said to be 7 cities, cities of gold, cities of light, cities of secrets. They shimmer in the heat haze of legend, passed down by conquistadors and native oral traditions alike. To European ears, they sounded like greed Eldorado's fraternal twin, a myth of metal and mirage. But what if the gold was never literal? What if Cibola wasn't about riches but remnants? The story of the 7 cities of Cibola doesn't begin with Spanish lust. It begins with loss. Let's rewind. The earliest references come not from explorers, but survivors, Moorish slaves, shipwrecked monks, native guides spinning tales not of treasure, but of otherness. Cities where the architecture didn't match the land, where lights glowed at night, where tools moved without hands, where knowledge was kept under lock and memory. By the time Francisco Vázquez de Coronado heard these tales in the 1540s, they'd transformed into gold-lust dreams. He followed them north from Mexico into what's now New Mexico and Arizona, expecting palaces. He found pueblos, adobe homes, stone towns, and went mad with disappointment. But what if he wasn't entirely wrong? What if what he saw were descendants of something older? Not gold cities, but ghost cities. Ruins built atop ruins. Names changed purposes, forgotten. But the bones, the design, remained. Indigenous oral traditions don't talk about 7 cities of greed. They talk about 7 cities of origin. The Zuni Hopi and Navajo have stories of emergence from underground, from distant lands, from cities that no longer exist in this world, but once did. They speak of Sisyphus portals, of star beings who taught agriculture mathematics law, of a time before the flood, before the fire before us. Those 7 cities weren't just shelters. They were archives. Let's get topographical. Some researchers note that ancient settlements in the American Southwest, Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde Bandelier share strange similarities: solar alignments, acoustic properties, underground chambers, known as kivas, used for ritual and possibly communication. What kind of communication we don't know. But the Hopi say the Kachina spirit messengers, teachers, emerged from those places, bringing messages from the stars. Kachinas are often dismissed as costume dancers in seasonal ceremonies, but in Hopi tradition, they're beings hybrids, teachers watchers. Their headdresses aren't decorative, they're functional. Their stories don't end in metaphor, they begin in memory. And in that memory, the world has ended before. The Hopi speak of not one, but 4 previous worlds each, destroyed by imbalance. Fire ice flood civilizations, rising, falling, resetting, but not wiped clean. Always a few survive, a few remember, and they go north to the cities. 7 of them cities holding the blueprint not just for survival, but for rebuilding. Now let's shift to architecture. The great houses of Chaco Canyon weren't improvised shelters. They were astronomically aligned multi-story complexes made from precisely cut sandstone blocks timber, hauled from over 70 miles away, rooms aligned with solstices and equinoxes. Windows designed to capture specific celestial events. This wasn't trial and error. It was instruction. Beneath the surface tunnels, some filled in, some still open, leading where nobody knows. Locals whisper of entrances to something deeper, to cities not seen since the last sun. And the gold? Maybe there was some. But maybe the gold wasn't metal. Maybe it was knowledge, the kind buried when the world burns, the kind that doesn't survive conquest, remembered only in lullabies. Dances, ruins that don't quite make sense. Like the Sipapu, a hole in the floor of every kiva, said to be the portal from which ancestors emerged. Perhaps not from the earth, but from below the floodline, from the cities that came before, 7 of them, each holding part of the code, the pattern, the structure of a civilization, not yet remembered, but never quite lost. Maybe Cibola wasn't a destination. It was a system, a backup plan, a distributed vault for a dying age. 7 nodes, 7 frequencies, 7 chances to get it right next time. And here we are, standing at the edge of the next fall, still looking for gold, still ignoring the message. The 7 cities weren't hoarding treasure, they were guarding memory. And what happens when that memory is unlocked? Maybe we're not meant to know yet. But while Cibola vanished into the dust of history, another city was pulled into the sea, a real one visible today, tied to God's war and submergence, Dwarka. The sunken city of Dwarka, India. There's a sound the ocean makes when it swallows memory. Not violent, not theatrical, just an ancient hush, like a secret being sealed. That's the sound. Off the western coast of India, where divers went looking for coral reefs and found cities, not coral, not rock cities. Welcome to Dwarka Gateway, between history and myth, between scripture and stone. According to Indian mythology, Dwarka was Krishna's city, not just a spiritual teacher or god, but a king, strategist, warrior who ruled a city so vast, so splendid, its palaces shone with gems, its streets echoed with chariots, drawn by white horses and artificial elephants. And then, it was gone, submerged by the sea, not as punishment, but as prophecy. For thousands of years, Dwarka lived only in sacred texts, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavata Purana, the Harivamsa. These epics describe it with surreal detail. A city with 900,000 palaces, wide boulevards, moats with drawbridges, a harbor bustling with sea trade. Skeptics dismissed it, myth, allegory, political fiction from ancient priests. Then in 2001, the Arabian Sea revealed its secret. Using sonar and marine archaeology tools, the National Institute of Ocean Technology discovered massive geometrical structures beneath the Gulf of Combat, nearly 40 meters below the surface, miles offshore. Astonishment followed. Then, silence. Because what they found broke the narrative. Regular formations, gridded streets, rectangular structures, pillars, a network spread across 9 kilometers. Not random debris, but urban planning. Carbon dating from a piece of wood pulled from the site yielded an age of approximately 7,500 before Common Era. Let that sink in. 7,500 years before Christ, before Egypt, before Sumer, before what we call civilization. If that dating is accurate, and it remains controversial, it makes the underwater city of Dwarka the oldest known urban structure on Earth. Even if the dating's off by a few millennia, the implications are staggering. We're still looking at a sunken city where there shouldn't be one staring at geometry, where only chaos was expected. That geometry matches descriptions in scripture word for word. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as built by Vishwakarma, the architect of the gods, a city of impossible beauty, erected in a single day, a city Krishna abandoned, knowing it was fated to drown. And drown it did. As the sea roared and Krishna walked away into the forest and was never seen again. Myth perhaps, but now we have sonar submersibles, and the ocean doesn't lie. Let's talk construction. Marine archaeologists found structures made of basalt and other stone, not native to the seafloor rectilinear formations that don't occur. Naturally, stone blocks stacked in patterns. What looks like staircases, foundations, not nature, design. They found artifacts, pottery shards, beads, fossilized bones, and signs of fire. Fire at the bottom of the ocean. What burns underwater? Only memory, only myth, only cities that weren't supposed to exist. Dwarka did exist, and not just in one place. Multiple sites off the coast of Gujarat, modern-day Dwarka and Bet Dwarka, have revealed submerged temples, walls, jetties, structures aligned with the sun and stars, matching ancient blueprints, found not in engineering manuals but in Sanskrit. The modern city of Dwarka was built atop ruins, those ruins atop older ruins, and those who knows. This isn't a city, it's a palimpsest, a layered memory, a rebirth machine. Each layer built with reverence for the one before, and the sea waits. Dwarka isn't alone. India's coastlines are littered with hints Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu, Mahabalipuram near Chennai, and more sites where land gives way to myth. Myth to stone, all sunken, as if the sea knows what we're not ready to remember. Let's ask the question nobody dares. What if the flood myths are describing the same event? Atlantis, Lemuria, Eridu, Dwarka. What if these civilizations end the same way fire flood fall because it happened? What if Dwarka isn't just a city, but evidence of pre-flood engineering knowledge older than the Himalayas cultures? So attuned to Earth's cycles, they built in sync with it, yet still lost. And Krishna, if you strip the blue skin and godhood, what's left? A leader strategist? War general who fought battles not just with arrows and chariots, but with something more. In the Mahabharata, Krishna helps deploy weapons sounding eerily modern missiles, beams of light projectiles causing mass destruction. We've heard these echoes in the Rama Empire, seen scorched earth at Mohenjo-Daro. Maybe Krishna wasn't a god, but a remnant, a descendant of a civilization clinging to order in the last days before the sea claimed everything. When he saw the end coming, he walked away, let it fall. Maybe some things are meant to be buried, not to punish, but to preserve. Dwarka drowned, but didn't die. It waits, and in its silence lies a warning one. We've heard before, one we're still ignoring. The ocean has one rule: everything returns. But in the Pacific, another mystery stirs beneath the waves, not in Sanskrit, in silence. Yonaguni. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. The sea doesn't forget. It smooths silences, but never forgets. Off the coast of Japan's westernmost island, Yonaguni is a monument so massive, precise, and inexplicable, it forced the ocean to whisper. Some say it's a natural formation, a trick of geology and currents. Others swear it's proof of an ancient civilization, lost beneath the waves, a city, a shrine, a warning. Everyone agrees it doesn't belong. Discovered in 1986 by a diver looking for hammerhead sharks, the Yonaguni Monument is a submerged stone structure 25 meters below the east. China Sea's surface over 150 meters long, 40 meters wide, half a football field. Its sides are terraced with right angles, surfaces flat, and smooth lines too clean. Imagine a ziggurat drowned. Explain why it has staircases, platforms, ramps. This isn't natural erosion, not as we know it. The main feature is a stepped pyramid-like mass flat plains, intersecting at right angles, vertical walls, rising with unnatural precision terraces, suspiciously man-made. Some resemble stone-cut architecture in Peru's Sacsayhuaman or Egypt's Giza, but underwater, deep too deep for a city built in recent millennia. Sea levels here haven't been that low since the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 before Common Era. There it is again, that date, the red line of pre-flood memory. What if Yonaguni wasn't built before the flood, but during it to survive? Records stand against it. Divers have found anomalies on archway roads, walls, channels of slab, with what looks like a megalithic face-carved eyes, nose-mouth weathered, but unmistakable. On land, these would scream artificiality. Submerged skeptics lean on geology, calling it a fluke of tectonics and erosion. Japan's own Ministry of Education once listed it as a cultural asset, something nature built, or something we forgot. Marine geologist Professor Masaki Kimura, a maverick to skeptics, spent decades studying Yonaguni, measuring angles, mapping terraces, photographing inscriptions. He believes it's a sunken city, part of a larger landmass beneath the East China Sea from Taiwan to Okinawa. Kimura estimates the structures could be 10,000 years old, older than any East Asian culture, older than Jomon pottery, Sumer Egypt Stonehenge. Who built it? No known Japanese culture from that period could. No writing, no tools, no myths, at least none that survived. Okinawan and Ryukyuan folklore whisper of lost sea people builders from the east, erecting great stone places vanishing when waters rose. Legends don't name them, but remember them. Fragments, ghosts. The pattern seen worldwide, a civilization building in stone, aligning with stars watching the sea rise, trying to endure. What if Yonaguni was their final temple, their last message? The monument isn't just huge, it's oriented, aligned with magnetic north, structured in ratios reflecting the golden mean. Other submerged formations nearby hint Yonaguni is the tip of something vaster erased. Japan's seismic activity, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, means the Pacific Ring of Fire doesn't play games. What if Yonaguni's builders knew this, designed it not to stand forever, but to signal forever? A monument so massive, even if Earth shattered, it would endure. Now it lies in silence, but silence isn't absence. The sea watches the stone holds, and in its wet corridors, the past whispers of engineers without names. Cities watching stars from beneath waves, memory encoded not in ink, but angle. Yonaguni may be the final punctuation of a forgotten sentence. Civilization didn't start once, it started again and again. Each time with less memory, less time, less mercy. Yet each time someone left a mark, not a story, a structure. The question isn't whether a pre-flood civilization existed, but which one from Yonaguni to Egypt, Peru to India. The echoes aren't coincidence. They're cartography, a map drawn not with lines but ruins. Follow that map, and it leads across the Atlantic to an underwater road to the Bahamas, to a legend called Bimini. Bimini Road, Bahamas. Beneath the turquoise shimmer of the Atlantic, off North Bimini, lies a formation that shouldn't exist. It stretches in a near-perfect line across the seafloor. Massive rectangular limestone blocks, interlocked like a fossilized serpent, disappearing into the blue. Locals call it Bimini Road. Skeptics call it geology. But the sea doesn't lie, it buries. Discovered in 1968, Bimini Road ignited a firestorm. To the untrained eye, it's a roadway breakwater wall, something constructed. Stones uniformly cut, fitting too tightly, following a serpentine path, guiding to something out of sight. Then there's the timing. In 1938, psychic Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed Atlantis' remnants would rise near the Bahamas in 1968 or 1969. Madness, coincidence, or something unsettling? Bimini isn't just strange, it's wrong. Let's talk geology. The official story: the blocks are beach rock naturally occurring, sediment from cemented sand and shell fragments. Slabs can break in regular shapes due to natural fracturing in theory. But here's what keeps researchers like Dr. Greg Little up at night. The stones are leveled, not haphazard, flat tops, right angles, some stacked deliberately. Sonar shows the formation continues beneath the sand, not just a path, a structure, part of something larger, buried, possibly ancient, maybe the last whisper of a drowned world. Bimini's tied to Atlantis theories. Plato placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Strait of Gibraltar, somewhere in the Atlantic. Historians scoff, but clues accumulate. Bimini sits on the Great Bahama Bank, a massive underwater plateau with geological features defying easy explanation. Ridges, drop-offs, unnatural cuts. If above water, it would have been during the last ice age. Bimini Road could be a coastal city's remnant seawall dock temple path. When waters rose, they didn't just drown the city, they erased context. That's Bimini's issue, not what's visible, but what's missing. No inscriptions, artifacts, tools, just stone. Stone remembers, remains. Limestone doesn't preserve organics, wood, clay, human artifacts decay. Architecture's eternal. That's what Bimini offers and hides. Some claim Bimini points to Andros Island, where other underwater formations exist, or part of a grid connecting submerged sites, Cuba, Azores, Canaries. A lost map, a distributed civilization. Bimini's an edge node, a warning buoy. Sea levels during the last ice age show. Vast seabed areas were once coastal lands. Drop levels by 100 meters and cities reappear, stone paths silenced like Bimini. What if it wasn't built by modern humans, Sumerians, or Egyptians, but by precursors, pre-flood engineers, a culture scattered across timelines? Maybe Bimini wasn't a city, but a gate, a threshold, the last exit before the deluge. When waters came, they sealed it, like a file marked "Do Not Open." Tides are turning. Sonar improves. Divers grow boulder stones, speak one line at a time. Bimini's part of a pattern, a submerged Rosetta Stone, connecting cultures never meant to touch. Decode it, and we don't just find Atlantis, we find what came before. The supercontinent, the real one, the world beneath the waves that never had a name until now. Zealandia, the lost continent of Zealandia. It was there all along, lurking beneath the South Pacific, hiding in plain sight. Too massive for myth, too drowned to matter until now. Zealandia isn't a theory. It's a continent geologically verified in 2017, forcing an uncomfortable question into daylight. How does an entire continent vanish from history? No legends, no maps, no memory, just ocean and silence. Stretching nearly 5 million square kilometers, Zealandia is about 2/3 the size of Australia. 94% of it is submerged. What's above sea level today? Just the mountainous peaks of its highest ridges. New Zealand, New Caledonia, a few scattered islands. But once it was land forests, rivers, possibly cities, possibly something more. Because here's the problem with Zealandia. It shouldn't be forgotten. It's too vast, too significant. If it had ever been inhabited, the archaeological footprint would be massive. And yet, history doesn't mention it. No legends from Polynesia, no whispers from Asia, no echo in the mythologies of the sea, unless it was remembered differently. Let's talk about Lemuria, a once hypothesized landmass in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, proposed in the 19th century to explain the spread of lemurs across distant islands. But soon it evolved no longer. Just a zoological placeholder, but a lost continent, a cradle of civilization, a place of ancient wisdom now drowned. Science dismissed it because it wasn't falsifiable. But then 2017 happened. Zealandia surfaced, not literally, but geologically, confirmed as Earth's 8th continent, broken off from the ancient supercontinent, Gondwana, tens of millions of years ago. But the timing gets fuzzy. When did it submerge? Some scientists admit parts may have been above water as recently as 10,000 years ago. There it is again, 10,000 before Common Era. The scar line of history, the red thread that runs through Atlantis, through Göbekli Tepe, through Dwarka, through Bimini, and now through Zealandia. The question is, no longer was there land, was there life? Let's look at the clues. New Zealand is home to some of the oldest and most unique species on Earth. Flightless birds, ancient trees, reptiles that haven't changed in hundreds of millions of years. It's a biological time capsule. And time capsules don't form in isolation. They survive in isolation, which means they had company once, which means the rest of Zealandia wasn't just jungle. It was home to something then gone, swallowed not just by water, but by forgetting. Because when we talk about forgotten civilizations, we often imagine the erasure of records building's tools. But the most dangerous eraser is the one that deletes context. What if Zealandia was Lemuria, or part of it a continent that once stretched from India to Easter Island? A network of cultures connected not by empire, but by water, an aquatic civilization, a maritime Pacific. It would explain the megaliths of Nan Madol, the stone heads of Rapa Nui, the obsidian roads buried beneath the Solomon Sea, the oral traditions of the Maori, the Hawaiians, the Samoans, which speak of ancestors who came from vast lands that sank beneath the waves. Zealandia may not be Lemuria, but it is evidence. Evidence that the world is older, stranger, and more interrupted than we've ever been allowed to admit. Because the Pacific doesn't just hide islands, it hides time. And in that drowned time lies a possibility no one wants to face, that human history is not a line, it's a loop. Civilization doesn't rise once and fall once. It cycles. And in each cycle, a few carve warnings into stone. A few disappear below the surface, geographically or culturally. And they wait for the next loop, for the next fall. So what happened to Zealandia? Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just trees, birds, and volcanoes. Or maybe it was a civilization so different from our own that we don't even recognize its fingerprints. Because not all knowledge is technological. Some is environmental, spatial, oceanic. The knowledge of tides, currents, fish migrations, and star paths, and the resonance of stone underfoot. What if the civilization of Zealandia wasn't obsessed with building upward but outward? What if their monuments were made of water-sound ritual? What if the clues are still out there, buried beneath coral, encoded in carvings too weathered to read, echoed in mythologies, dismissed as children's stories? Because if Zealandia was once above water, and if someone lived there, and if they knew the flood was coming, they wouldn't build a city. They'd build a message, a system of whispers, stretched across the ocean, a cultural submarine. And we are just now beginning to hear it, the pulse of a drowned heart. A pattern buried not in books, but in the bones of continents. Tartessos, ancient Spain. The story of Tartessos begins where most stories end, at the edge of the map, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. At the murky border between Mediterranean civilization and the wild storm-churned Atlantic, between what the Greeks knew and what they feared. Tartessos was a name whispered by travelers, coveted by kings, and dismissed by historians. It was called a kingdom, a port, a city-state, a land of wealth beyond imagining, a place where silver ran through the earth like blood, through veins, where rivers sparkled with metal and rulers dined in gold. And then it vanished without war, without warning, without a trace. This is not legend. This is documented absence. And absence always has a shape. Let's rewind. The earliest references to Tartessos come from the 9th century before Common Era, when Greek and Phoenician traders began venturing west from the Mediterranean into the Iberian Peninsula. What they found stunned them. A people already there, already organized, already rich. They didn't discover Tartessos. They encountered it, and what they encountered was unlike anything they expected to find in the West. These people had writing, a form of semi-linear script that remains undeciphered to this day. They had metallurgy, advanced smelting techniques for silver, tin, and gold. They had agriculture, irrigation, architecture, and trade routes, many of them. Tartessos became a crucial node in a Mediterranean network of trade that reached from Mesopotamia to the British Isles. They were the Bronze Age middlemen dealing in metals and mystery. Their capital, never definitively located, was said to lie near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, where modern-day Seville and Cadiz now sit, a fertile estuary with a natural harbor surrounded by hills rich in ore, and then silence. Around the 6th century before Common Era, Tartessos vanishes from the historical record, not gradually, abruptly. No written account of conquest, no record of migration, no collapse narrative, just gone. Even Herodotus, writing centuries later, admits the city was once great and then wasn't. Which leads to the question no one wants to ask. What if Tartessos wasn't just forgotten? What if it was erased? Let's talk geography. The Andalusian coastline is an unstable hybrid of river delta marshland and shifting sands, the perfect environment for a city to drown slowly. Not in a dramatic tsunami, but in quiet entropy. Year by year, the sea creeps in the land, subsides, salt water infiltrates the soil, agriculture collapses. Trade dwindles. Sound familiar? It should, because it's eerily close to Plato's description of Atlantis. Circular islands, concentric canals, rich in metals, a naval power, located just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato was describing Atlantis around 360 before Common Era. But many believe he wasn't inventing it entirely. He was borrowing from older sources from half-remembered truths. And in that memory, Tartessos fits like a puzzle piece. Too advanced for its context, too rich to be real, too suddenly silent. Let's get speculative. Some fringe researchers, and a few serious ones, believe Tartessos was not just a local Iberian culture, but the westernmost outpost of a pan-Atlantic network, a maritime civilization with roots stretching across the ocean from the Azores to the Canary Islands, from Bimini to the Caribbean. A culture that predated classical antiquity and rose from the remnants of an even older world, a pre-flood world, a civilization not rebuilding from scratch, but re-establishing lost trade lines, lost knowledge, lost rhythms. And Tartessos, a terminal, a relay point, a memory hub, which brings us to the artifacts. Few remain: some tombs, some inscriptions, and gold. Lots of gold. Not just jewelry, but language. The Carambolo treasure, discovered near Seville in the 1950s, is a collection of golden plaques, bracelets, and pectorals, whose craftsmanship suggests not just wealth, but symbolic sophistication. The symbols etched into them, still undeciphered, are not Phoenician, not Iberian, something else, something older. And the architecture gone, but not without whispers. Satellite imagery of the Doñana National Park, a marshy estuary, reveals circular depressions consistent with Plato's description of Atlantis' rings of land and water. Researchers have found ancient canal systems buried beneath the mud causeway's foundations, cities that don't appear in history books because they were built before history resumed. And that's the terrifying idea that Tartessos was Atlantis, or at least its shadow. Its echo is civilization reborn after the flood, built on the bones of one that came before. Not myth, not metaphor, memory. And memory, as we've seen, has layers. Tartessos may not have been the original, but it was a carrier, a vessel, a city that knew too much, lasted too long, and vanished too cleanly. Because maybe it was allowed to vanish. Maybe someone made sure it did. And now it's a name in a dusty text, a ghost on a forgotten map, a signal buried beneath a Spanish marsh. And if we ever decode that signal, if we ever see Tartessos for what it truly was, it won't just rewrite history. It will reveal that history has been rewritten before, over and over. But the next city on our journey didn't just vanish. It was never supposed to be found. It's not just lost, it's hidden. The Aztecs called it their birthplace. They called it Aztlan. Aztlan, Mesoamerica. There are places that vanish in silence, and places that vanish in song. Aztlan is the latter. It echoes across the memory of the Aztecs, not as a cautionary tale or a political fiction, but as an origin. Myth so heavy with detail, so suffused with symbolic geography, that it feels less like mythology and more like an encrypted history. Aztlan was the beginning, not of the world, but of a people. The Mexica, part of what we now call the Aztec Empire, trace their lineage back to this mysterious northern land. It was a paradise, an island city, a place of glimmering lakes, white stone, and 7 caves, Chicamostoc, from which 7 tribes emerged. And then they left, wandered, conquered, became gods and kings and legends. But they never forgot. Aztlan was not a moral tale. It was home. And if you think that sounds familiar, an advanced city on an island, abandoned after some great turning point, then yes, you've heard this before. Atlantis, Lemuria, Tartessos, Dwarka. Aztlan fits the mold. But what if it's not just coincidence? What if Aztlan was real? What if it wasn't just a cultural metaphor for Mexica identity, but a cultural memory of a civilization that predated them by millennia? Let's start with what the codices tell us. In the Codex Botarini Codex, Auban, and Codex Azcatitlan, we see depictions of the Mexica migration from Aztlan to the Valley of Mexico. Stylized maps, painted in bold glyphs and vivid inks, show an island city surrounded by water. Birds fly overhead. A mountain pierces the sky. People emerge from caves carrying banners, musical instruments, and the Huitzilopochtli serpent-shaped bundle that represented wisdom, law, and continuity. None of this feels accidental. These are the icons of origin. And what's strange is the specificity. Aztlan isn't vague. It's a place described consistently, an island with temples, an urban layout, a location on the water, and most critically north. All Aztec migration legends agree Aztlan was north of their eventual homeland, north of Tenochtitlan. Some said it was days away, others centuries, but all agreed it was lost, left behind, or sealed. Let's talk geography. Over the centuries, scholars, archaeologists, and speculative historians have tried to locate Aztlan. Theories range from Utah to New Mexico, from northern Mexico to Baja California. Some look to the Four Corners region, others to Lake Chapala. A few fringe researchers even point to the lost coastlines of the Pacific Northwest. But maybe they're all wrong. Maybe the confusion is the point. Because what if Aztlan didn't exist on a map? What if it was an echo, a shadow of a pre-flood civilization remembered, not in stone, but in migration, in motion? Let's get symbolic. The 7 caves of Aztlan-Chicomostoc are said to be the origin points of 7 tribes. Each cave a gateway, each tribe a lineage. Some scholars suggest these represent cultural divisions, but others believe something stranger, that the 7 caves represent underground cities, or better yet, survival bunkers. You heard that right. Aztlan may not have been a city at all. It may have been a refuge, a place of hiding during the cataclysm that shattered the last world. The Aztecs believed we live in the 5th sun, the 5th incarnation of human civilization. Each age before us ended in fire, flood, wind, or earthquake. Each age reset. Each age required survivors. And where would survivors hide? In caves, in subterranean temples, in Aztlan. This theory isn't new. It haunts every indigenous cosmology across the Americas. The Hopi tell of emerging from kivas after the Third World was destroyed. The Maya speak of Xibalba, the underworld that housed the ancestors until it was safe to rise. And the Inca believed their founders emerged from a cave called Tambo Toco, a direct analog to the 7 caves of Chicomostoc. It's the same story, over and over. A pre-human, pre-flood world, a great forgetting, a re-emergence, and a migration. So maybe Aztlan wasn't just a homeland. Maybe it was the last node in a dying network, a site of preserved knowledge, a fragment of something older, Rama Lemuria, or some unnamed precursor. Let's talk language. The name Aztlan means place of the heron, but it can also be interpreted as place of whiteness, a land of shining stone, a luminous city, an echo of descriptions we've seen in Atlantis, in Dwarka, in Plato's dream, and who lived there, the Aztec Chichimeca, a hybrid people, not gods, not mortals, but transmitters, messengers. They didn't build Aztlan, they left it, and they carried its symbols forward: the feathered serpent, the obsidian mirror, the triple temple layout, the belief that history moves in cycles. Because maybe Aztlan wasn't a singular place, but a cultural hard drive. A vessel, a mythological casing around a real location that once held the DNA of a pre-flood civilization. And that DNA still pulses in Aztec temples, in Mayan glyphs, in Andean stonemasonry. The same architectural fingerprints, the same celestial alignments, the same serpent iconography. This isn't diffusionism, it's recollection, shared trauma, passed down through ruins and ritual. And Aztlan. That was the safe house, the hidden library, the outpost of a memory. We're only just starting to remember, because beneath the stories, beneath the soil, beneath the scripted erasure of colonization, the land still remembers, and the caves still echo. And if we ever find Aztlan, if we stand on its island beneath its heron, above its caves, it won't just be an archaeological discovery. It'll be a reunion with the parts of ourselves we left behind when the waters rose. And if Aztlan was the exit point for a civilization fleeing its own flood, then the next land on our map may have been their destination, a kingdom of trade and myrrh, a partner of Egypt, a place that was always known and never found the land of Punt. The land of Punt, ancient Egypt. In the annals of Egyptian history, the land of Punt is more than a trading partner. It is a memory, a shimmering mirage at the edge of known geography, a place of incense, trees, exotic animals, and gods that walked like men. Egyptians called it Ta-Netcher, the land of the god, not land of a god, the god. It was never conquered. never ruled, only visited, and always with reverence, which raises an unsettling question. What if Punt wasn't a distant kingdom? What if it was a remnant? A preserved fragment of a pre-flood civilization that Egypt itself grew from or envied? Let's begin with the evidence. Punt is most famously recorded during the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut around 1470 before Common Era. Her expedition, one of the first documented voyages in human history, was immortalized in reliefs at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. These carvings aren't vague. They show ships, large cedarwood ships, laden with goods, gold, ivory, ebony baboons, giraffes, panther skins, and trees. Whole trees uprooted and transported back to Egypt. Frankincense and myrrh, precious and rare, gifted to temples and embalming chambers. But the carvings also show something stranger: buildings on stilts. Queen Ati of Punt, depicted as unusually large, with exaggerated features, men in odd dress, and a lush, rich land that looked nothing like arid Egypt. This wasn't just commerce, it was pilgrimage. But here's the problem: despite being recorded multiple times over 1,000 years of Egyptian history, no one knows where Punt was. Let that sink in. One of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world maintained a long-term relationship with a foreign land, sending ships bringing back goods, even referring to it as sacred. And yet in modern times, we can't find it. Some scholars say it was in Somalia, others Eritrea, still others Yemen, all pointing vaguely south or east. But none can explain the reverence. None can explain why the Egyptians gave Punt divine status unless it was older, much older, unless it was already ancient when Egypt was born. Let's go deeper. Punt isn't just referenced by Hatshepsut. Menhotep III launched expeditions there around 1950 before Common Era. So did Pharaoh Sehur around 2500 before Common Era. And every time the tone is the same: we are not going to trade, we are going to remember. Because in the myth of Osiris, arguably the most important myth in Egyptian religion, there's a moment when Osiris, the god-king, travels to a distant sacred land. Some scholars argue that this land of the god was Punt. In other words, Osiris came from Punt. Now add this: in Egyptian cosmology, the cycle of civilization begins with Zep-Tepi the first time, a mythical golden age, when gods walked the earth and taught humanity everything it needed to know. Where did this Zep-Tepi occur? No one knows. But some texts hint that it wasn't in Egypt. It was elsewhere beneath the horizon, in a land of plenty, a land across the sea. Punt. What if Egypt didn't invent itself? What if it inherited its sacred geometry, its solar alignments, its temple codes? What if all of it came from Punt? And what if Punt didn't just vanish? What if it sank? Because the coastline of the Horn of Africa is one of the most geologically unstable regions in the world. Tectonic rifts, subduction zones, sudden drops in elevation. Entire landmasses could disappear and leave no trace beneath shifting seabeds. Just ask Bimini, ask Dwarka, ask Zealandia, ask Atlantis. What if Punt was a surviving node from a pre-flood global civilization, an outpost that Egypt found and kept secret, traded with, worshipped, and when it finally vanished, whether by rising seas' internal collapse or simply sealing itself off, Egypt recorded only its silence and kept calling it the land of the god? Let's get granular. The flora and fauna imported from Punt, frankincense, myrrh, giraffes, baboons, are not native to Egypt. But here's the thing: the trees thrived when replanted in Egyptian soil. They adapted perfectly, which suggests a similar climate, a similar elevation, a shared ecosystem. But where is that ecosystem now? Parts of southern Arabia fit barely. But if you trace back sea levels to the Younger Dryas, a different picture emerges. Large portions of the Red Sea and Arabian Peninsula would have looked drastically different: islands, now submerged, ridges now erased. Could Punt have been one of them? Could it have been a bastion, an archive, something far older than Egypt? A place that remembered what Egypt forgot to ask, because every culture, when asked where it came from, points backward. But Egypt always pointed to Punt, always south, always to the sea. And maybe they weren't just pointing to a source of wealth. Maybe they were pointing to origin, a memory so sacred it could only be preserved in ritual, a knowledge so dangerous it could only be traded in incense. And when the last ship returned, when the last queen died, when the last temple was sealed, Egypt turned inward, became a museum of itself, because Punt was gone, but its blood still ran through Egypt's veins, through its pyramids, its calendars, its stars. And maybe if we find Punt, not the ports, but the core, we'll find more than trade routes. We'll find the next chapter in the story that began with a flood. But before we cross that sea, we need to descend further into the first storm, the first civilization, the first fall, the antediluvian world biblical. There is a silence in Genesis that feels deliberate. Between the moment Adam is exiled from Eden and the moment Noah boards the ark, the Bible rushes past entire centuries, millennia speaking in vague genealogies and whispered hints as if trying to cover a wound. What little it says is drenched in unease. Long-lived patriarchs, cities built in a single generation, sons of God descending to earth, and giants walking among men. The world before the flood, the antediluvian world, is not described in detail. It's buried intentionally, casually, as if remembering it too clearly would invite it back. But the fragments that remain suggest not a primitive society, but a terrifyingly advanced one. A world not of mud huts and stone spears, but of engineering, empire, and catastrophe. Let's start with Genesis chapter 6, one of the strangest and most densely packed chapters in the Bible. It introduces the Nephilim, the giants, or fallen ones. It tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Their offspring were described as heroes of old men of renown. The phrasing here is not accidental. These are not gods, not angels, not demons. These are intermediaries, the result of something ancient and forbidden. And in the very next breath, God decides to destroy the world, not because of disobedience, but because every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This is not the story of a single act of sin. This is the collapse of civilization, a civilization that by all accounts should not have existed at the time, because the genealogies list lifespans of 700, 800, 900 years. Men who walked with God, men who built cities, invented instruments, and forged tools of bronze and iron before the flood, thousands of years before the rise of Sumer or Egypt. So where are their ruins? Where is their debris? Where are their craters? Maybe the flood was not just punishment. Maybe it was a cover-up. Let's go to Enoch. The Book of Enoch, once part of the biblical canon in early Christianity and still revered in Ethiopian tradition, gives us a wider lens. It speaks of the Watcher's angels who descended to earth and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, astrology, weaponsmithing, make-up sorcery, plant lore. Their leader Azazel is condemned for teaching mankind how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. This is not metaphor. This is a technology transfer. And in Enoch's account, the flood isn't a random act of divine wrath. It's a deliberate act of containment, a failsafe. The earth becomes corrupted not through sin, but through information, through progress, through an acceleration of knowledge that unravels balance. Sound familiar? It should, because the antediluvian world mirrors every myth of every lost civilization. A golden age corrupted, a fall, a deluge. Let's examine the timeline. In Genesis chapter 5, 10 generations pass from Adam to Noah. If taken literally, this places the flood somewhere around 2300 before Common Era. But the ages are symbolic, and the text itself doesn't care about dates. It cares about distance. The antediluvian world is not prehistory. It is pre-memory, a time so alien that remembering it becomes dangerous. And yet, traces persist. Across the world, flood myths repeat, like a broken record. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds an ark. In India, Manu is warned by a talking fish. In Mesoamerica, the gods drown humanity in a flood, then reshape them from maize. In Australia, the rainbow serpent sends waters over the land to wash away corruption. In every corner of the earth, the story is the same. A civilization falls and water rises. The survivors, always a few, always chosen, always instructed to carry something forward. Which brings us back to Noah. His ark is not a boat, it's a vault, a memory container, a DNA repository, a cultural reset switch, because the antediluvian world wasn't wiped clean. It was archived. What survives is not just life, but code the instructions for civilization, compressed into myth, embedded in ritual, scattered across continents. And here's where it gets darker. The Bible says that even after the flood, the Nephilim were still around. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward. How? Why? Because the flood didn't end the story. It started a new version of it, a reboot, with fragments of the old world hidden in its matrix. Maybe that's why we find advanced knowledge embedded in early post-flood cultures, the precise mathematics of Egypt, the astronomical alignments of Sumer, the sudden emergence of agriculture and architecture across Eurasia and the Americas. These aren't coincidences, they're echoes. The antediluvian world wasn't erased, it was rebranded. And its architects, maybe they didn't drown, maybe they went underground or off-world or into memory, waiting for the next awakening. Because the antediluvian flood is not the last flood. It's the template, a system event, a cyclical crash, and every civilization since has been a pale imitation of the one we lost, the one that built not just towers, but timelines, the one that broke itself with too much power, too much pride, too much knowledge. And perhaps that's the true lesson, that knowledge is never lost, only buried, only encoded, only waiting. But the antediluvian world didn't just leave myths. It left people lineages, legacies, and one of them may have survived more than any other. A city built by a man who walked with angels, a city of stars and books and watchers, Enoch's civilization, biblical apocryphal. In the kaleidoscope of ancient myth and fragmented scripture, there is one figure who moves like a ghost. Across every theological threshold, too righteous for earth, too human for heaven, too dangerous to forget. Enoch mentioned only briefly in the canonical texts of Genesis, yet expanded into vast prophetic volumes in the apocryphal book of Enoch. He is the man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. But what the later texts claim is that he wasn't just taken. He was shown taken into the heavens, into the deep structure of reality, into the machinery behind the stars. And what he brought back, what he left behind, may be the last surviving thread of the oldest civilization never acknowledged. Because Enoch's story is not that of a man, it is the story of a society. According to the Book of Enoch, widely read among early Christians, still canon in Ethiopian tradition, and almost surgically excised from the Western Bible, Enoch was a scribe, a watcher of time, a receiver of wisdom from the so-called watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth to guide, protect, and eventually corrupt humanity. In this narrative, Enoch becomes a mediator between worlds, documenting everything the watchers reveal, from the structure of the cosmos to the secrets of metallurgy, the motions of stars, and the roots of divination. This was not idle storytelling. This was data retention. Enoch's civilization, if such a term can be used, was built around knowledge, not the trial and error of slow agricultural invention, but the infusion of complete systems, calendars accurate to fractions of a day, angelic hierarchies mapped in exhaustive detail, sacred geometry, astronomical mechanics, moral codes carved into stone before anyone else even built cities. It wasn't just myth, it was infrastructure, and it was temporary. Because Enoch's writings make it clear, this civilization was living on borrowed time. The Watchers, once guardians, had overstepped. They had bred with human women, producing the Nephilim hybrids of terrifying size and intellect. They taught mankind secrets too heavy to hold. The balance was broken, and the solution was brutal: a flood to wipe the board clean. But not before one last act of preservation. God commands Enoch to write everything down, all his visions, all his knowledge, all the forbidden teachings. He is told to hide these books, to bury them for future generations, for the wise of the end times. What kind of civilization builds not just for its own survival, but for the reboot of the human story? What kind of knowledge is so volatile it has to be encrypted in scripture, sealed in caves, and passed down in whispers? We don't know what Enoch's cities look like. No ziggurats remain. No shrines bear his name, but his texts describe landscapes of precision sacred mountains where stars rise and set with purpose gates where angels emerge during specific seasons, vaults where winds and spirits are stored like data. This wasn't superstition. This was a cosmic operating system, a fusion of science, spirit, and geometry. And if the city that Enoch lived in, such a city existed, then it was not made for longevity. It was made for transmission. A node in a larger network of pre-flood civilization that stretched across what we now call mythological geography: Eridu, Dwarka, Mu, Atlantis, Shambhala. Each city playing a role, each city carrying a different piece of the code. But Enoch's piece was unique. It was recursive. It was about the cycle itself, the rise and fall, the moral decay, the flood, the survivors, the watchers, the next rise. Because Enoch didn't just receive prophecy, he became a prophet. And in the most chilling passages of the apocryphal books, he doesn't just describe the past, he describes our future. He sees civilizations fall in sequence. He sees towers built to the sky and torn down by fire. He sees the stars disordered, the earth poisoned. He speaks of a generation of iron and clay, one that will have all knowledge and no wisdom, one that will forget the flood, one that will repeat it. And if that's true, if Enoch wasn't just a mythic placeholder, but a historical cipher, then his civilization didn't vanish. It hid in texts, mislabeled as religious fanatics' dreams, in measurements embedded into sacred architecture, in astronomical alignments, dismissed as coincidence in oral traditions, and underground vaults, and dusty scrolls. No one dares translate completely. Because Enoch was not just trying to save his world, he was trying to warn ours. What kind of civilization encodes a warning across 10,000 years? What kind of disaster forces a man to become myth, a city to become allegory, a culture to become scripture? A cataclysm, not of fire or ice, but of forgetting. Enoch's civilization is the ghost of a memory, glimpsed in apocrypha, buried in metaphor, and pulsing through every flood myth and golden age echo the world has left behind. And if his books are still hidden, if the cave where he stored them still exists buried in some unscanned ridge, some unexcavated tomb, some forgotten library in Ethiopia or the Dead Sea, they are not just religious texts. They are user manuals for survival, for memory, for the next loop. Because the flood was not the end of the world. It was the firewall. And everything we are, our monuments, our machines, our stories, may just be corrupted downloads of what Enoch tried to save. But not all survivors wrote books. Some built cities. Some built exiles. And one of them was cursed to walk east of Eden into a place no one wants to find: the land of Nod. The land of Nod, biblical. It begins with a murder, a single act of violence, raw and intimate, between brothers. Cain kills Abel and the earth opens its mouth to drink the blood. That moment is the rupture. The first crime, the first fracture in the mythic perfection of early human life. And for that, Cain is not killed. He is marked, banished, doomed to wander. He is sent east of Eden to the land of Nod. It's one of the most cryptic sentences in Genesis, a sentence so simple it barely registers. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod east of Eden. That's it. No explanation, no geography, no description of the people already there. But the implications are seismic, because when Cain arrives in Nod, he doesn't wander alone. He builds a city. He marries. He fathers a child, Enoch, not the same as the prophetic scribe of the apocryphal books, and names the city after him. Stop. Think. He builds a city, for whom the Bible tells us that at this point only 4 humans exist: Adam, Eve, Cain, and now dead Abel. So who lives in Nod? Who are the people Cain fears when he says, "Anyone who finds me will kill me"? Who is he building a city for? Unless there were already people there. Unless the land of Nod was not a wilderness, not a punishment, but an encounter, a meeting point between the post-Edenic humans and a civilization so old, so forgotten, that even Scripture refuses to speak its name. This is the crack in the narrative, the implication that humanity did not begin in a vacuum, that it emerged into a world already inhabited, that the Garden of Eden was not the world's only axis, but one among many. And that east of Eden in the land of Nod, something else, endured, something older, something different. Let's follow the breadcrumbs. Cain builds a city. That means planning materials, labor, mathematics, and purpose. These are not the actions of a cursed nomad. These are the marks of inheritance, of someone encountering a landscape already shaped by knowledge. Perhaps ruins, perhaps survivors, perhaps an older civilization shattered by a flood, or something worse and reduced to shadows and echoes. Cain does not create a city from scratch. He claims it, names it, leaves a mark on a place already marked. And that's where things get deeper. Cain's descendants are not primitives. They are innovators. His lineage includes Jabal, the father of all, who plays stringed instruments and pipes, and Tubal Cain, a forger of all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. These aren't agricultural achievements. They are technological metallurgy, music theory craft. Sound familiar? This echoes the apocryphal watchers, the forbidden knowledge, the antediluvian tech. What if Cain didn't bring civilization to Nod? What if he found it there? Found a land of survivors, found remnants of a pre-flood city, found ruins half buried under sand and silence, and sparked something new or worse awakened. Something. Because the mark of Cain isn't just a curse, it's a protection. God says, "If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." Why protect a murderer? Unless Cain's journey wasn't about punishment but preservation. Unless he carried something dangerous, something necessary, a strain of human memory that had to be kept alive, even if it meant putting it in exile. The land of Nod then becomes more than geography. It becomes a metaphor for all the places history refuses to acknowledge. It is the fringe, the edge, the off-map zone where memory is exiled and civilizations fade into folklore. Every culture has its Nod, the hidden land, the cursed city, the place no one visits and everyone fears. In Sumer, it's Kur. In Egypt, it's Duat. In India, it's Naraka. In Mesoamerica, it's Xibalba. And all of them exist east of something sacred, east of center, east of paradise. And maybe, just maybe, they're all the same place. Or the same idea, a civilization that absorbed the fallen, not just morally fallen, but technologically fallen. Civilizations that knew too much, that burned too bright, that rebuilt too fast, and were told to wait, to wander, to disappear into silence until they're needed again. Because the land of Nod isn't the end of Cain's story. It's the beginning of a new timeline, a new lineage, a branch of humanity that walks parallel to Adam's bloodline, separate, marked, in possession of tools and songs and iron, too early, too advanced, too deliberate. And as the ages passed, and the waters rose, and Babel fell, and the maps were redrawn, Nod may have sunk into the ground, or ascended into myth, or simply became the next world. Because if you keep walking east from Eden, through memory, through metaphor, through myth, you reach the place where all the pieces start to reappear, scattered, encoded, waiting a chain of islands across the Pacific, a cradle that may never have been above water, the kingdom they called Mu. Mu Lemuria, linked to Pacific island cultures. Mu Lemuria. The names flicker like mirages across maps that don't exist anymore. Names whispered in pseudo-historical texts, New Age esoterica, and the crumbling margins of colonial-era anthropology. Most scholars roll their eyes. They classify Mu and Lemuria as discredited theories, the hallucinogenic leftovers of 19th century attempts to explain away evolutionary puzzles. But beneath the myth, beyond the fiction buried in the stone memories of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, there is something more, not proof perhaps, but pattern. And patterns have power. Let's strip away the noise. Forget the Victorian mystics and theosophical cults who claimed Lemurians were 12-foot-tall ethereal beings with third eyes and translucent skin. Forget the Atlantean crossover fan fiction. Focus on what remains. When the fog clears an idea both older and more elemental, that a vast land once existed in the Pacific, a sprawling continent or super-archipelago now lost beneath the sea. And that land, whatever its name left behind, echoes cultural, architectural, linguistic, and spiritual. It didn't vanish. It dissolved into the Pacific bloodstream. Let's start with the stones. Across the Pacific, scattered like fossilized breadcrumbs, are megalithic structures that should not exist. On the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia lies Nan Madol, an artificial complex of over 90 islets built from giant basalt columns, some weighing 50 tons, stacked with astonishing precision. There are no quarries nearby. No iron tools have been found. The oral traditions say the stones were flown in by magic, or technology, or memory of a method lost. Further east on Easter Island, Rapa Nui, you find the Moai massive stone heads with torsos buried beneath soil, aligned along magnetic lines, their backs turned to the ocean, as if guarding something inland or protecting what remains behind them. The indigenous Rapa Nui people tell of an earlier race, the Long Ears, who built the Moai and ruled the island before being overthrown. Legends of collapsed civil war and forgotten knowledge. And then there's Tonga, with its Hamunga Amaui, a trilithon stone gate weighing over 30 tons, or the stepped pyramids of Tahiti, or the ruined platforms of Hawaii, or the still buried foundations found beneath the waters off Yonaguni, Guam, and even Fiji. This isn't scattered coincidence. It's infrastructure, the scattered skeleton of a civilization that may have once stretched across thousands of miles, across a territory now drowned, fragmented, erased, not by forgetfulness, but by flood. Let's talk language. Polynesian languages are tightly clustered. Despite being spoken over a territory that spans a third of the globe, their linguistic drift is surprisingly small. This implies a relatively recent and sudden expansion, not well accounted for by mainstream anthropology. And yet some root words in Pacific tongues have parallels in Dravidian languages of South India and Tamil Nadu places, often linked to Lemurian myths. Coincidence maybe, or maybe we're looking at the cracked mirror of an older tongue, a global pigeon born from pre-flood survivors rebuilding on islands scattered like punctuation marks across the open ocean. Let's pivot to myth. Nearly every Pacific island culture has flood legends. Hawaiian chants tell of a great deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. Samoan stories speak of islands swallowed by the sea. Maori traditions from New Zealand speak of Hawaii, the ancestral homeland, far across the ocean, an island that disappeared beneath the waves. Rapa Nui's legends speak of a once massive land home to the creators of the Moai, now sunken and gone. Again and again, the same story surfaces: a homeland, lost to catastrophe, survived a dispersal, a rebuilding. Sound familiar? It should. It's the story of Atlantis, of Noah, of Enoch, of Dwarka, of every lost city and civilization we've traced in this narrative. The only difference is the location, this time in the Pacific, and the scale, unfathomable. Some theorists believe Mu stretched from present-day Easter Island to Indonesia. Others claim it encompassed modern-day Oceania. Some imagine it as a physical continent, others as a network of cultural superorganisms, sustained by trade ritual and memory shattered by rising sea levels and the trauma of forgetting. And the trauma is real. Genetic studies show that many Pacific Islanders carry traces of unknown ancestry, ghost lineages that don't match any known continental population. Not Asian, not African, not Native American, something else, something older, something left behind. Let's talk astronomy. Across the Pacific, ancient navigation was not just practicality, it was sacred. Polynesian voyagers used stars, ocean swells, bird paths, and bioluminescent plankton to cross thousands of miles of open ocean with no maps, no compasses, no metal. This knowledge was not guessed. It was inherited from whom what kind of civilization trains its memory to survive only through song, through skin, through ritual? A civilization that knows writing can be lost, that monuments can sink, that only story can survive. The flood. Maybe that's what Mu was: not a landmass, a memory mass, a civilization, not of towers and roads, but of cultural DNA scattered across islands to act as reboot nodes for the next world. Each island, a data packet, each myth, a compression algorithm. And if that's true, then the Pacific is not empty. It is a hard drive, and we've barely scratched the surface. Because if Mu or Lemuria did exist, and if its fragments seeded the cultures we now call indigenous, then the world we know is a post-Mu civilization, built not from the ground up, but from the surface down. And the question is no longer whether it existed, it's how much of it remains. Because the last civilizations in our list may not be drowned or vanished. They may still be visible, still standing, still coded into the mystery of cities that officially exist, yet carry in their bones something unexplainable. And the first among them, the cities of the Indus Valley. The Indus Valley Civilization, early Vedic. In the northwest corner of the Indian subcontinent, between the rugged Himalayas and the scorched Thar Desert, a civilization rose so suddenly and so completely that even its ruins exude a kind of quiet arrogance. It did not build ziggurats to reach the gods. It did not carve giant statues of its rulers. It did not obsess over conquest. It built systems silent, perfect, unyielding. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, Harappa Mohenjo-Daro Rakhigarhi Dholavira. And while its ruins have been dated to roughly 2600 to 1900, before Common Era, every new discovery forces the line of origin backward until we're left standing on the lip of prehistory, staring into a mirror that shouldn't exist. Because what we find in the Indus is not a civilization becoming, it's a civilization that already was. From the moment its bricks are uncovered, we see standardization, same size, same ratios, same materials, across cities hundreds of miles apart. Streets aligned on precise grids, drainage systems more advanced than those in many 19th century European towns, multi-story homes, centralized granaries, reservoirs the size of stadiums, public baths, urban planning with a level of forethought and symmetry that would make modern city councils blush. And then there's the mystery. No monuments, no palaces, no evidence of kings or empires, no great conquests recorded in stone, and no deciphered writing. They had script thousands of seals with strange glyphs, elephants, unicorns, geometric patterns, human-animal hybrids, but no Rosetta Stone has been found. No bilingual inscriptions. The language of the Indus remains stubbornly silent, as if refusing to tell its story until we're ready to hear it, or worse, until we remember it. Because here's where it starts to crack open. The cities of the Indus weren't laid down haphazardly over centuries. They were planned, designed, and that planning includes celestial alignments, environmental optimization, and resilience to flooding and earthquakes. In Mohenjo-Daro alone, the so-called Great Bath is a marvel of hydraulic engineering, complete with advanced water management systems, sealing materials, and architectural proportionality that suggests a philosophical obsession with balance. But who were they? Mainstream history says they were early Bronze Age peoples, part of the same wave of urbanization that hit Mesopotamia and Egypt. But that doesn't explain the anomaly, because the Indus didn't imitate. It didn't follow. It wasn't part of a learning curve. It was a transfer. It arrived too complete, too fast, too different. Let's get deeper. Recent satellite imaging and excavation have revealed that the Indus River was once flanked by an even greater river, the mythical Sarasvati, long thought to be symbolic. Vedic texts describe this river as the lifeblood of an earlier forgotten culture. And now, under the dry soil of Haryana and Rajasthan, archaeologists are finding massive ancient settlements along a course that matches the long-lost Sarasvati. These settlements are older than Harappa, older than Mohenjo-Daro. Some push back to 5,000 before Common Era, some perhaps earlier. And the people who lived there didn't just survive, they excelled. The Vedic texts, the Rig Veda, the Brahmanas, speak of a golden age of mighty cities, built by Asuras and Devas, not as mere myths, but with architectural detail, fortresses with 100-gate cities, in the sky technologies of light, vibration, vimanas, flying vehicles, weapons that could destroy entire populations with heat and fire. In mainstream academia, these are dismissed as poetic exaggerations. In Vedic cosmology, they are memory. And what if those memories didn't begin in the Vedic period? What if they are cultural fossils, encoded in hymns, preserved in ritual, carried forward from an earlier epoch, an Indus epoch? Because when the Vedic Aryans arrived in the subcontinent, whether by migration, invasion, or assimilation, they didn't find wilderness. They found cities. And instead of destroying them, they absorbed their remnants, their water systems, their astronomical knowledge, their philosophical frameworks. So maybe the Indus Valley didn't collapse. Maybe it transitioned from stone to verse, from architecture to ideology, its physical cities buried under flood, and time its mental cities reborn in Vedic scripture, and the silence of its script. Maybe that was deliberate. Maybe the knowledge was too volatile to be spoken, too sacred to be explained. So, it was encoded in ritual, in alignment, in silence. Because not all memory is vocal. Some is spatial. Some is hydraulic. Some is sung, and some is waiting beneath 5,000 years of silt, watching us mistake absence for emptiness. The Indus Valley isn't just another chapter in the story of ancient civilizations. It's the closing verse of a forgotten song written in a language older than memory, a relic from a world that came before the flood, before Babel, before the fall. And perhaps it holds the final key, the one that unlocks all the others. Follow the trail westward where its ruins fade into dust along dried rivers and buried trade roads. Listen closely, and you'll hear echoes, the same pulse beating in Sumer, in Egypt, in Dilmun, even in the ghost of Atlantis. These aren't imitations, they're verses of the same ancient hymn, scattered like ashes across the earth. If that possibility stirs something deep inside, you're not alone. Subscribe now and join the search through time's most guarded mysteries. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Every voice adds light to the unknown. The next revelation could be one click away.